The desert night swallowed sound like a living thing. Iraq, 1991. February cold that cut through Kevlar and skin alike, turning sweat to ice against ribs. Staff Sergeant Jack Dalton lay prone on hardpan that felt like frozen concrete, his breathing controlled to the point of meditation. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out. The rhythm his grandfather had taught him before the old man's hands got too shaky to hold a rifle steady. Next to him, Corporal Vincent Kane adjusted the spotting scope with fingers that never seemed to feel the cold. 29 years old to Jack's 29, brothers in all but blood, 2 Ohio boys who had enlisted the same week and somehow managed to stay together through boot camp, scout sniper school, and now this godforsaken patch of sand 12 clicks behind enemy lines. Wind's shifting, Kane whispered, his breath a ghost in the thermal scope's green glow. 2 clicks left. Hold 3 mils. Jack made the adjustment without conscious thought. Muscle memory. Trust. The Iraqi colonel stood in the doorway of the command bunker, 1,247 yards away, a cigarette ember painting his face in brief orange strokes. A man, a father perhaps, definitely someone's son, but also the architect of the artillery barrage that had killed 19 Marines 3 days ago and would kill more tomorrow if he lived to give the order. Wind steady now, Kane said. Send it. The M40A1 barely whispered when Jack squeezed the trigger. No drama, no movie thunder, just a crack that the wind took away, and then the long wait. 2.8 seconds for the bullet to travel its arc, dropping 37 inches before rising on the wind, a calculation of physics and prayer. The colonel's head snapped back. The cigarette fell. He crumpled like his strings had been cut. Confirmed kill, Kane said, something like admiration in his voice. You're the best I've ever seen, brother. Jack worked the bolt, chambering another round out of habit, though the secondary targets had already scattered. His hands were steady, his heartbeat had barely elevated, but something in his chest felt wrong, like a stone settling into place where lighter things should live. Let's move, he said. Kane clapped him on the shoulder, and they broke down the hide site with the efficiency of men who had done this dance a dozen times before, covering tracks, erasing evidence of their presence, ghosts leaving a corpse behind. Jack never saw the smile on Kane's face in the darkness, never saw the way his spotter was already calculating angles that had nothing to do with bullet trajectory. If he had, the next 29 years might have gone differently. But that night, trudging back toward friendly lines through enemy territory, Jack Dalton still believed in brotherhood, still believed that the man watching his back would die before letting him fall. He would learn better. The memory hit Jack like a gut punch as he stood in the corrugated metal warehouse that passed for a supply depot at Forward Operating Base Phantom, Afghanistan, 2020. The heat was different here, dry instead of the Gulf's wet heaviness. But the smell of diesel and gun oil and young men trying not to show fear, that was universal. That was every war. His hands, weathered and scarred and 58 years old now, moved through the inventory checklist with the same precision he had once used to calculate wind drift and bullet drop. Cases of MREs, pallets of 5.56 ammunition, water purification tablets, the unglamorous logistics that kept an army functioning, the work they gave to men who had been broken down and deemed unfit for anything that mattered. Yo, cargo! The voice belonged to Private First Class Tyler Morrison, 20 years old and still thinking war was something out of a video game. We're short 3 cases of .50 caliber for the gun trucks. You gonna hook us up or make us fill out the whole request in triplicate? Jack looked up from his clipboard, meeting Morrison's cocky grin with the flat expression that had become his default over the decades. The kid's buddies stood behind him, 4 more PFCs with that special blend of boredom and bravado that came from too much downtime between patrols. Requisition forms are by the door, Jack said, his voice carrying no inflection. No anger, no hurt, just the mechanical response of a man who had learned that showing emotion only gave them more ammunition. Fill them out completely. I'll have your ammo ready by 1600. Come on, old man, Morrison pushed. It's just 3 cases. You gonna let paperwork get Marines killed? The accusation landed exactly where it was meant to. A knife between ribs that had scar tissue thick enough to barely register the pain anymore. Jack held Morrison's eyes for 3 seconds, long enough to let the kid see something that made his grin falter. Short enough that it didn't become a confrontation that would require intervention from someone with actual rank. 1,600 hours, Jack repeated, with proper forms. Morrison's friends pulled him away, their laughter echoing off the metal walls as they left. Jack heard the nickname they called him when they thought he was out of earshot. Cargo, the washed-up supply sergeant who had never seen real combat, who spent his war counting bullets instead of firing them, who was too old and too slow to be anything but a glorified warehouse manager. Let them think it. Let them all think it. The truth was a weight he carried alone, and some days that felt like the only thing keeping him upright. If he ever put it down, he might just collapse entirely. The rest of the morning passed in the rhythm Jack had cultivated over 29 years of this half-life. Sign for deliveries. Update inventory logs. Coordinate transport schedules with the motor pool. Work that required attention to detail and zero creativity, zero initiative, zero of the skills that had once made him one of the most feared snipers in the Marine Corps. He ate lunch alone in the depot, chewing through an MRE that tasted like cardboard and chemicals, washing it down with water that had been purified so many times it barely qualified as a liquid anymore. The other senior enlisted gathered at the chow hall, swapping stories and complaints, building the bonds that made units into families. Jack didn't go, hadn't gone in years. They didn't want him there, and he had stopped wanting to be anywhere. At 14:30, the depot door opened again. Jack looked up, expecting Morrison with his forms, but instead found himself staring at a face that shared his jawline, his eyes, his nose broken in the same place from the same stupid bar fight when they were both too young to know better. Staff Sergeant Ryan Dalton, 26 years old, rifleman with Bravo Company, walked into the depot with the careful neutrality of a man entering enemy territory. His uniform was dust-stained from patrol, his rifle still mag-loaded and slung across his chest. He moved with the controlled aggression of youth in training, every muscle coiled and ready. "Need to draw ammunition for night patrol," Ryan said, not quite meeting Jack's eyes. 200 rounds, 5.56, 4 frags, 2 smokes per man, 12-man patrol. Jack felt something crack inside his chest. The same hairline fracture that opened every time his son treated him like a stranger. He moved to the ammunition lockers, pulling the required cases with hands that had loaded thousands of magazines, fired tens of thousands of rounds, killed at distances that would make Ryan's patrol engagements look like knife fights. "Sign here," Jack said, sliding the requisition form across the makeshift desk that was really just plywood on sawhorses. Ryan signed with sharp, angry strokes. Jack watched his son's hands, seeing the calluses from rifle work, the small scars from fieldcraft, the tremor that every man got before going outside the wire into territory where people wanted him dead. He wanted to say something, wanted to tell Ryan to stay low, watch his sectors, trust his instincts, wanted to tell him that fear was not weakness, that coming home was not cowardice, that surviving did not make you less than the men who fell. Instead, he said, "Be safe out there." Ryan's jaw tightened, and for a moment Jack thought his son might actually respond with something beyond professional courtesy. But then Ryan just nodded once, grabbed the ammo cases, and walked out without looking back. Jack stood in the empty depot, surrounded by enough firepower to level a city block, and felt more defenseless than he had in any firefight. This was the real casualty of war, he thought. Not the bodies that fell on foreign soil, but the distance that grew between fathers and sons until they became strangers who happened to share blood. His hand moved unconsciously to his cargo pocket, fingers finding the small brass cylinder he had carried for 29 years. A single point, .308 Winchester round, the bullet engraved with 2 words in his own shaky handwriting from 1991. For Kane. He had never fired it, had loaded it into chamber after chamber, year after year, always thinking the next deployment would be the one where he finally found Vincent Kane and made him pay for 6 dead Marines and a destroyed life. But Kane was smoke, a ghost, probably dead in some third world gutter years ago, his betrayal unpunished and his victims unmourned. Jack returned the round to his pocket and went back to his inventory logs, because that was what cargo did, counted, organized, existed in the margins of other men's wars. The sun was painting the western sky in shades of amber and blood when Sergeant Major Tom Briggs found Jack running final inventory for the night. Briggs was 55, built like a fire hydrant, with a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts after the original got blown off. 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, the kind of career that made other Marines stand a little straighter when he walked past. "Jack," Briggs said, his voice carrying the rasp of too many years breathing burned pit smoke. "Got a minute?" Jack set down his clipboard. Briggs was one of maybe 3 people on this base who called him by his actual name instead of Cargo, and the only one who knew why he had accepted the nickname without protest. They had served together in the Gulf, had been there for the aftermath of Kane's betrayal. Briggs had testified at the court-martial, had tried to defend Jack when the evidence went sideways, had been one of the men who held Jack back when he tried to go after Kane with his bare hands. "What do you need, Tom?" Briggs glanced around the depot, confirming they were alone, then pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Got the convoy assignments for tomorrow. Resupply run to Firebase Viper through Karak Valley." Jack felt his jaw tighten. Karak Valley was bad terrain, the kind of narrow mountain pass that ambush planners dreamed about. Sheer cliffs on both sides, limited visibility, no room to maneuver. They had lost 2 convoys there in the last 6 months. Command kept using it anyway because the alternative routes added 3 hours to travel time, and apparently dead Marines were more acceptable than delayed logistics. "Who's driving lead truck?" Jack asked. Briggs met his eyes. "You are." The words hung in the air between them like unexploded ordnance. Jack had driven convoy maybe twice in the last year, always on the safest routes, usually with enough escort that insurgents stayed hidden. Putting him on lead truck through Karak Valley was either monumental stupidity or something worse. "Why?" Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. "You didn't survive 3 decades in the Marines without developing a sense for when you were being set up." "Because Lieutenant Chen requested you specifically," Briggs said. "She's running an op, thinks there might be something happening in that valley, and she wants someone in the convoy who knows how to handle themselves if things go sideways." "I'm supplied, Tom. I haven't been in a real fight since 1991, I know," Briggs interrupted. "But Chen doesn't know that. She pulled your original service record before the redactions, saw Scout Sniper School, saw your confirmed kills. She thinks you're some washed-up door kicker who got stuck behind a desk, not—" He trailed off, the unfinished sentence heavy with everything they never talked about. Jack looked at the deployment board on the wall, found Ryan's name under Bravo Company Escort Detail. His son would be riding shotgun in one of the gun trucks, providing security for a convoy led by the father he thought was a coward. "When do we roll out?" Jack asked. 0600, 4-vehicle convoy, 2 gun trucks for escort, your supply truck, 1 fuel tanker. Should be routine, but you know how that goes. Jack knew exactly how that went. Routine was what officers called missions right before they went catastrophically wrong. But he also knew that refusing would raise questions he couldn't answer, and that maybe, just maybe, this was the universe giving him a chance to do something that mattered for the first time in 3 decades. "I'll be ready," he said. Briggs nodded, then hesitated, something working behind his weathered face. "Jack, there's something else. Intel's been picking up chatter about a new player in the region. Some kind of foreign advisor working with the local insurgents. No name, no nationality, but the way he coordinates attacks, the precision." Briggs paused. "It reminds me of someone we used to know." Jack's hand went to his pocket again, fingers closing around the brass round. "Kane's dead, Tom. Has to be. No way he survived 30 years of this business without someone putting a bullet in him." "Probably," Briggs agreed. "But I wanted you to know. Just in case tomorrow feels wrong, trust your gut. That instinct kept you alive in the Gulf. It'll work here too." After Briggs left, Jack secured the depot and walked across the base toward his quarters. A plywood box barely big enough for a rack and a footlocker. The Afghan night had come down hard and cold, stars so bright they looked close enough to touch. Somewhere in the distance, generators hummed their endless song. Closer he could hear young men laughing, the kind of too loud humor that came from trying not to think about morning. His route took him past the motor pool, and on impulse he detoured to the maintenance bay where tomorrow's convoy vehicles sat in various states of readiness. The gun trucks looked solid, their mounted M240S cleaned and ready. The fuel tanker's tires were fresh, but it was his assigned vehicle, an older MRAP with a cracked windshield and mismatched body panels, that made him stop. Someone had spray-painted cargo across the driver's side door in sloppy black letters. Fresh paint, still tacky to the touch. A gift from Morrison and his friends, probably. A reminder of his place in the hierarchy. Jack stared at the word for a long moment, then did something he hadn't done in years. He smiled, not with humor, not with bitterness, just with the cold acknowledgement that sometimes the universe had a sense of irony so sharp it cut. He continued to his quarters, stripped off his uniform, and lay on his rack in the darkness. Sleep wouldn't come. It never did before missions, even supply runs that were supposed to be routine. His mind kept circling back to Briggs' warning, to the brass round in his pocket, to the thousand small decisions that had led him from that night in Iraq to this plywood box in Afghanistan. At some point after midnight, he gave up on sleep and dug into his footlocker, pulling out the small wooden box he kept beneath his spare uniforms. Inside were the only photographs he had kept from his old life. His wedding day, Sarah in a simple white dress that made her look like an angel. Ryan as a baby, red-faced and screaming, perfect. Sarah again, this time in a hospital bed, her hair gone from chemo, her smile brave and breaking Jack's heart even in a frozen moment. She had died 4 years ago, and her last words to him had been a request he had failed to honor. "Tell Ryan the truth," she had whispered, her hand cold in his. "Tell him who you really are. He needs to know his father isn't what he thinks." But Jack had stayed silent, because what good would the truth do? How could he explain that he had been one of the most skilled snipers in the Corps, only to be destroyed by his best friend's betrayal? How could he tell Ryan about the 6 Marines who died because Jack trusted the wrong man? About the court-martial that cleared him legally but destroyed him professionally? About the 29 years he had spent in purgatory because no one believed the real story? Better to let Ryan think his father was simply mediocre. Better than having him know Jack had once been great and then lost everything. Jack returned the photographs to the box to the footlocker, and lay back down in darkness. Tomorrow he would drive through Karak Valley. Tomorrow his son would provide security from a gun truck. Tomorrow would be routine according to the mission brief. Jack's hand found the brass round in his cargo pocket one more time, and he fell asleep holding it like a talisman against all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. When his watch alarm vibrated at 0430, Jack was already awake, had been for an hour, his mind running through equipment checks and contingency plans with the methodical precision of a man who had survived by never assuming anything would go according to plan. He dressed in the darkness, every movement automatic. Utilities, boots, plate carrier with ceramic plates that would stop rifling rounds but felt like wearing a tombstone. Kevlar helmet that had seen better days but would still keep his skull intact if the world decided to throw rocks at him. He left his rifle in the rack, drew his assigned M4 from the armory instead, a weapon he had qualified expert with, but never loved the way he had loved the precision of the M40. The chow hall was serving its standard pre-dawn fare, powdered eggs that tasted like cardboard, coffee that could strip paint, toast that had achieved some sort of quantum state between bread and charcoal. Jack ate without tasting, fueling the machine that was his body, while around him Marines prepared for their various missions with the gallows humor that every generation of warriors learned independently. At the motor pool, the convoy was coming together under harsh halogen lights that made everything look washed out and unreal. Jack found his MRAP, the word cargo, still visible despite someone's half-hearted attempt to wipe it off. The vehicle's crew consisted of himself and Private Danny Martinez, a 22-year-old kid from El Paso who had volunteered for convoy duty because he thought it would be safer than foot patrols. "Morning, Sergeant Jack," Martinez said, his accent soft and musical even at this ungodly hour. "Trucks fueled and checked. I already did the walk-around inspection." Jack nodded, but did his own inspection anyway, because that was what you did when your life depended on machinery. Tires, good tread, proper pressure. Fluids, topped off. Armor plating, intact except for a few dings that wouldn't matter unless they got hit in exactly those spots. The M240 machine gun mounted in the turret, clean, function checked, ammo belted and ready. In the back of his mind, a voice that sounded like his grandfather's whispered that something was wrong, that the odds of getting through Karak Valley clean were too long to bet on, that maybe he should fake an injury, call in sick, find some excuse to stay behind the wire where cargo belonged. Jack climbed into the driver's seat instead. The convoy briefing was standard doctrine delivered by Lieutenant Chen, a sharp-eyed intelligence officer who looked too young to have the clearance she carried. Routes, checkpoints, rules of engagement, what to do if they hit an IED, took fire, lost communications. All the cheerful possibilities that came with driving thousands of pounds of explosive materials through hostile territory. Jack saw Ryan across the briefing room, his son's attention locked on Chen with the focus of a man who knew his life might depend on remembering every detail. Their eyes met for half a second, and Jack saw something flicker across Ryan's face. Concern, contempt. The distance between them was too great to read the subtle emotions. Then Chen dismissed them and the moment was gone. The convoy rolled out at exactly 600, just as the sun was painting the eastern mountains in shades of fire. Lead gun truck with Ryan's team providing forward security. Jack's MRAP, second in line, loaded with medical supplies, ammunition, and water. The fuel tanker third, rear gun truck trailing as overwatch. 4 vehicles, 23 souls, moving at 40 clicks per hour into terrain that had killed better men on better days. Martinez rode shotgun, his youth evident in the way he kept checking his rifle, adjusting his gear, looking for threats that weren't there yet. Jack kept his eyes on the road and his mind on the 1,000 small details that might mean the difference between completing this mission and becoming another statistic. The radio crackled with routine traffic, call signs, position reports, the boring mechanics of military operations that somehow never got boring when your life was on the line. They were 30 kilometers out when the landscape began to change, the relatively flat desert giving way to the jagged mountains that marked the entrance to Karak Valley. The road narrowed, compressed between rock walls that rose hundreds of feet on both sides. Shadows fell across the convoy, the sun blocked by geology that had been here millions of years before humans invented war. Jack's hands tightened on the wheel. Every instinct he had cultivated over 3 decades was screaming that this was wrong. The valley was too quiet, no goat herders, no civilian traffic, just empty road and rocks that could hide a battalion. Convoy 6, this is 6 actual. Chen's voice came over the radio from the Tactical Operations Center back at base. Intel update, possible hostile activity in your sector. Stay alert. Roger that, Ryan's voice responded from the lead truck. All vehicles maintain interval and watch your sectors. Martinez shifted in his seat, and Jack could see the kid's knuckles white on his rifle. Sergeant, you ever been through here before? No, Jack said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to trickle into his bloodstream. But I've been through 100 valleys just like it. Keep your eyes moving. Don't fixate on any one thing. If something feels wrong, it probably is. They pushed deeper into the valley, the walls closing in until there was barely room for 2 vehicles to pass. Jack's mind was doing calculations it hadn't done in years, automatically cataloging potential sniper positions, ambush points, fields of fire. The training never really left you, he realized. It just went dormant until you needed it. Then his radio crackled with a sound he had been dreading his entire career. Not words, just static. Then a voice, distorted by encryption and distance, speaking with an accent that Jack hadn't heard in 29 years but recognized instantly. Hello, Jack. Long time no see. Martinez looked at him, confused. Sergeant, was that on our frequency? Jack's world had narrowed to a single point of focus, his heart rate spiking from 60 to 120 in the space between heartbeats. Because that voice belonged to a ghost, to a dead man who couldn't possibly be alive, to the brother who had betrayed him and vanished into history. Vincent Kane. Tomorrow in the valley, the voice continued, each word precise and mocking. We'll finish what started in 1981. Been waiting a long time for this, brother. Hope you're ready. The transmission cut out, leaving only static and the sound of Martinez asking questions Jack couldn't process because his mind was too busy calculating odds and outcomes and the probability that he was finally going to get the chance to fire that brass round he had carried for 3 decades. Except Ryan was in the lead truck. His son was point position in a convoy that had just been targeted by the most dangerous man Jack had ever known. A man who specialized in making people suffer before he killed them. Jack's hand moved to the radio, his mouth opening to warn the convoy, to tell Ryan to turn around, to abort the mission before Kane could spring whatever trap he had prepared. But before he could key the mic, the world exploded in fire and thunder, and everything Jack had feared came true at once. The explosion came from nowhere and everywhere at once. One moment the lead gun truck was rolling through a patch of sunlight between shadow, and the next it simply ceased to exist as a vehicle and became a ball of orange flame wrapped in black smoke that reached toward the sky like a prayer no God would answer. The shockwave hit Jack's windshield hard enough to spiderweb the glass, the sound not heard so much as felt in the bones, in the teeth, in the places where a man kept his certainties about the world. Jack's foot hit the brake on pure instinct, decades of muscle memory taking over before his conscious mind could process what he was seeing. Martinez was screaming something, his young voice cracking with panic, but Jack couldn't hear the words over the ringing in his ears and the sound of his own heart trying to hammer through his ribs. The smoke cleared enough for Jack to see bodies on the ground. 3 Marines down, their uniforms on fire, limbs at angles that meant they were already gone. 2 more crawling away from the burning wreckage, dragging themselves toward cover that didn't exist in this kill box of a valley. And Ryan. Where was Ryan? Then Jack saw him 50 yards ahead, lying face down in the dirt next to a boulder, his helmet 10 feet away and a spreading pool of dark blood beneath his head. Not moving, not crawling, just lying there like a discarded doll while the world burned around him. Every cell in Jack's body screamed at him to run to his son, to forget training and protocol and common sense, and just get to Ryan before the follow-up attack came. Because there was always a follow-up. Ambushes were planned in layers. The IED was just the opening move. Martinez had his door open and was trying to bail out when Jack grabbed his collar and yanked him back inside with enough force to slam the kid's helmet against the doorframe. "Stay into the truck," Jack said, his voice coming out flat and cold, and nothing like the fear that was eating him alive from the inside. "Get on the radio, call for QRF and medevac. Do it now." "But Sergeant, those guys are already dead or will be in the next 60 seconds if you don't get support rolling." "Radio, now." Jack was out of the truck before Martinez could respond, his boots hitting the dirt as rifle fire started to crack from the cliffs on both sides of the valley. The distinctive snap of AK-47s mixed with the heavier boom of something belt-fed, probably a PKM machine gun, all of it converging on the convoy with the kind of precision that spoke to training and planning and someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The fuel tanker behind them tried to reverse and slammed into the rear gun truck instead, the driver panicking, both vehicles now locked together and blocking any retreat. Jack heard more screaming, saw Marines trying to return fire while pinned down in positions that offered exactly zero cover from the high ground. This was a perfect ambush, a textbook kill zone. Someone had studied how the Marines moved, how they thought, how they would react, and had prepared a response for every possible choice. This was not local insurgents with improvised tactics. This was professional work. This was Kane. Jack sprinted toward Ryan, keeping low, using what little concealment the terrain offered. Bullets kicked up dirt to his left, to his right. One so close he felt the supersonic crack of its passage next to his ear. Somewhere in the back of his mind, the part that had been trained by the best scout sniper instructors the Corps had ever produced was already calculating trajectories and positions. The PKM was at 11 o'clock, roughly 300 yards up the cliff face, at least 2 riflemen at 2 o'clock, maybe 250 yards. And somewhere higher, somewhere with a sight line on the entire kill zone, there would be a sniper coordinating the whole thing. There would be Kane. Jack hit the dirt next to Ryan and rolled him over, his hands already going through the combat lifesaver assessment he had learned a lifetime ago. Airway, breathing, circulation. Ryan's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with shock. Blood ran from a gash across his forehead where shrapnel had carved a furrow through flesh and bone, missing his skull by maybe an inch. His pupils were different sizes. Concussion at minimum, possibly worse. "Dad?" Ryan's voice came out slurred and confused. "What happened?" It was the first time in 3 years Ryan had called him Dad instead of Sergeant or Sir or nothing at all, and Jack felt something break inside his chest that he didn't have time to examine. "You're going to be okay," Jack lied, because that was what you told people when they were bleeding and broken and the world was trying to kill them. Just stay down and stay quiet. He pulled Ryan behind the boulder, the only cover available in this godforsaken killing field, and risked a glance back at the convoy. The rear gun truck's turret gunner was trying to suppress the cliff positions, his M240 laying down fire that was more hope than accuracy at this range. 2 Marines from that truck had dismounted and were trying to reach the wounded from the lead vehicle, but rifle fire drove them back. One went down, gut shot, and started crawling back toward the truck while his friend tried to drag him. Martinez's voice crackled over Jack's radio, high and scared but still functional. "Cargo, this is Cargo 2. QRF is rolling, ETA 15 minutes. Medevac is..." The transmission cut off as something hit the fuel tanker, with the shriek of metal on metal and the whoosh of an RPG. The truck didn't explode immediately, but flames started to spread across its side like a living thing, and Jack knew they had maybe 2 minutes before several thousand gallons of diesel turned this valley into hell's parking lot. All units, this is actual. Lieutenant Chen's voice came through on the command frequency, her professional calm somehow making the situation feel even more desperate. Air support inbound, 12 minutes. Hold your positions and 12 minutes they don't have, Jack said to no one, because Ryan was semi-conscious and everyone else was too far away to hear and too busy trying not to die to listen anyway. He looked at his son, at the blood still flowing from the head wound, at the way Ryan's hands were shaking even though the rest of him was still. 26 years old, a lifetime ahead if he survived the next 12 minutes. A corpse cooling in Afghan dirt if he didn't. Jack made the decision in the space between heartbeats. He keyed his radio. Cargo 2, can you get to the driver's side storage? Martinez took 3 seconds to respond, probably trying to understand why Jack was asking about storage when they were in a literal ambush. Yeah, I think so. Why, Dan? There's a long case marked damaged equipment. Get it and bring it to my position. Fast as you can move. Sergeant, I don't... That's an order, Marine. Move. While Martinez scrambled to follow instructions he didn't understand, Jack turned his attention to the cliffs. His eyes, still sharp despite 58 years of wear, scanned the rock faces with the methodical precision of a man who had once made his living finding humans in terrain that didn't want them found. The PKM position was obvious, marked by muzzle flash and the steady stream of brass falling from its position. The riflemen were harder to spot, but Jack could track their fire by watching where bullets hit. The sniper was the problem. A good spotter would be somewhere with total overview, somewhere he could see the entire battlefield and coordinate fires accordingly, somewhere between 500 and 1,000 yards out, elevated, probably in a natural hide that looked like just another shadow on the rock. Jack found him in maybe 90 seconds, not by seeing the man, but by seeing what the man had disturbed. A patch of rock face that was slightly darker than it should be, positioned perfectly to cover every inch of the kill zone below. And there, just visible if you knew what to look for, the faintest glint of glass catching sunlight. A scope, a rifle, a man with his finger on the trigger of this entire operation. Martinez arrived in a controlled sprint that would have made his drill instructors proud. The long case clutched against his chest like it contained either salvation or damnation, and he wasn't sure which. He hit the dirt next to Jack hard enough to knock the wind out of himself. Got it, he gasped. What is this thing? Jack took the case and laid it flat, his fingers finding the latches with the ease of long familiarity. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept the moisture out for 3 decades, was an M40A1 rifle. His M40A1, the one he had used in the Gulf, the one that had been marked damaged and forgotten in supply logs, the one weapon in this entire base that he knew better than he knew his own heartbeat. The rifle was old. The stock had cracks the armory had judged terminal. The scope had been dropped hard enough to knock the zero off by an unknown amount. The barrel had fired so many rounds that the rifling was probably worn smooth in places. By any reasonable standard, this weapon should have been destroyed years ago. But Jack had kept it, moving it from base to base through a dozen deployments, always marking it lost or damaged on the paperwork, always keeping it close like a talisman of who he used to be before Kane destroyed everything. Martinez stared at the rifle, then at Jack, then back at the rifle. Sergeant, what are you doing? My job, Jack said, and started checking the weapon with movements so automatic they might as well have been breathing. Chamber clear, bolt smooth despite decades of storage. The scope mounted, but definitely not zeroed for this rifle anymore. Probably off by several minutes of angle. He'd have to shoot instinct and Kentucky windage, the way his grandfather had taught him before scopes were reliable enough to trust your life to. You're going to shoot that sniper, Martinez said, and it wasn't a question. I'm going to try. Sergeant, that's got to be 800 yards. Maybe more, with a damaged rifle, in this wind. Martinez shook his head. Nobody can make that shot. Jack pulled 3 rounds from the case. Old Point 308, Winchester 168 grain, boat tail hollow points that had been manufactured before Martinez was born. 2 of them went into his pocket. The third, the one with engraving on the brass, he loaded into the chamber with a reverence usually reserved for religious ceremonies. For Kane. 29 years he had carried this round. 29 years of imagining the moment when he would finally get to send it downrange into the man who had betrayed him. He had pictured it 1,000 different ways, in 1,000 different scenarios, but never like this. Never with his son bleeding next to him and Marines dying all around and 12 minutes until air support arrived to save whoever was still breathing. "I can make it," Jack said, and he wasn't talking to Martinez anymore. He was talking to himself, to the ghost of the sniper he used to be, to the man he had been before guilt and shame and 29 years of purgatory had turned him into cargo. He pulled Ryan's dump pouch close, filled it with loose rocks and dirt, and shaped it into a makeshift rest. Not ideal, not even good, but better than nothing when nothing was all you had. He positioned himself prone, the rifle across the improvised bipod, his body angled to account for the slight slope of the ground. Through the scope, the world became a circle of magnified detail. The damaged reticle was cracked across one quadrant, useless for precision work. The parallax was frozen, meaning distance estimation would be guesswork. The whole setup was a nightmare of variables and unknowns. But Jack had been making impossible shots since before most of these Marines were born. He found the sniper position, that dark patch on the cliff face, and started doing math in his head. Distance, 847 yards by his estimate, though it could be 50 yards more or less, and he'd never know until the bullet either hit or missed. Elevation, roughly 220 feet, which meant the bullet would fight gravity harder than usual. Wind, swirling and unpredictable in the valley, gusting from maybe 12 to 18 miles per hour, changing direction every few seconds as thermals pushed air around the rock formations. Temperature was 96 degrees Fahrenheit, which would affect the powder burn and bullet velocity. The ammunition was old, probably degraded, which meant he could expect maybe 50 feet per second less velocity than factory-fresh rounds. His own body was 58 years old, his eyes not quite as sharp as they used to be, his hands not quite as steady, his breathing not quite as controlled. And somewhere up on that cliff, Vincent Kane was looking through his own scope, coordinating fires, probably watching this exact position through optics, good enough to count the sweat drops on Jack's forehead. Martinez touched Jack's shoulder. "Sergeant Dalton said, Jack, you don't have to do this. Air support is coming. We can hold out." "Ryan can't," Jack said simply, because his son's breathing was getting shallower and the blood pool was getting bigger, and 12 minutes might as well be 12 hours when you were bleeding out from a head wound. He settled into the scope, found the dark patch again, and started the process every sniper learned in their first week of training. Control the breathing, slow the heartbeat, let the world narrow down to just the rifle, the target, and the mathematics of death at distance. In through the nose, 4 count, hold, 4 count, out through the mouth, 4 count, hold, 4 count. Repeat until the heart rate dropped from 110 to 80, then 70. Then that perfect zone around 60 where the pulse between beats was long enough to take a shot without the body's own movement throwing off the aim. Jack's finger found the trigger, that familiar curve of metal he had touched 10,000 times in training and combat. 4.5 pounds of pressure between here and there, between life and death, between the man he was and the man he used to be. Through the scope, magnified and distant, he saw movement in the dark patch. A shape resolving itself into shoulders, a head, the outline of a rifle. And there, just for a second, a face that Jack had seen in his nightmares for 29 years. Older now, weathered by time and war, and whatever path Kane had walked since the Gulf, but unmistakable. Their eyes met across 800 yards of empty air, two men who had been brothers looking at each other through rifle scopes on opposite sides of an ambush. Kane smiled. Even at this distance, even through damaged optics, Jack saw him smile that same cocky grin he had worn in 1991 when he thought he was untouchable. Then Kane's rifle started to swing toward a new target, tracking smoothly across the kill zone below, and Jack followed the angle of the barrel to see what Kane had found. A wounded Marine from the lead truck crawling toward cover, leaving a blood trail behind him like breadcrumbs for death to follow. Young, maybe 19. Somebody's son, just like Ryan. Kane's finger moved toward his trigger. Jack stopped breathing. The world became very simple in that moment. Wind was blowing left to right at roughly 15 miles per hour, gusting higher. He would need to hold 3.2 mils into the wind to compensate, except his reticle was broken, so he would have to estimate based on memory and experience. The bullet would drop approximately 42 inches over this distance at this temperature with this ammunition, requiring 2.8 mils of elevation that he would have to Kentucky windage because the scope's elevation adjustment was stuck. Add it all together, and he needed to aim roughly 4 feet to the left of Kane's head and 3 feet high, trusting that 30 years of dormant skill would somehow compensate for equipment that should have been in a landfill, and eyes that needed reading glasses, and hands that shook every morning until the coffee kicked in. It was impossible. Any instructor at any sniper school would have called this shot impossible and refused to even attempt it. The variables were too many, the unknowns too significant, the chances of success too small to justify the risk of giving away your position. But Jack had stopped caring about impossible around the time his wife died and his son stopped calling him dad, and he realized he had spent 3 decades being punished for crimes he didn't commit while the guilty man walked free. He aimed 4 feet left and 3 feet high to a point in space where Kane's head would be in 2.4 seconds if the bullet flew true, and the math was right, and God or fate or whatever force governed the universe decided that today, finally, after 29 years, justice was going to come in the form of 168 grains of copper and lead traveling at 2,500 feet per second. Jack's finger completed the trigger pull. Smooth, steady, the same motion he had practiced 10,000 times. The M40A1 roared. The recoil punched his shoulder like an old friend saying hello after too long apart. The muzzle blast kicked up dust that obscured his view for a crucial half-second. Martinez flinched at the noise, probably because he had never been this close to a precision rifle when it fired and didn't expect the violence of it. Jack worked the bolt, chambering one of his 2 remaining rounds, and got back on scope faster than most men half his age could manage. The muscle memory was still there, buried under decades of disuse but ready when called upon, like a language you learned as a child and never quite forgot. For 2.4 seconds, nothing happened. The bullet was in flight, subject to physics and wind, and the thousand small factors that made long-range shooting more art than science. In that span of time, Jack's mind served up a montage of moments from the past 3 decades. Sarah's face when he told her about the court-martial. Ryan as a boy asking why Daddy didn't want to talk about the war. The first time someone called him cargo and he didn't correct them. Every small surrender that had led him from scout sniper to supply sergeant to this moment, prone in Afghan dirt with a damaged rifle and a prayer that had been 29 years in the making. Then the bullet arrived at its destination, and the universe answered in fire and physics. Kane's head snapped back. Jack saw it clearly through the scope, saw the impact, saw the way Kane's rifle tumbled from his hands and started the long fall to the valley floor below, saw Kane himself stagger backward and disappear from view behind the rocks. "Holy Mother of God," Martinez whispered. "You got him. You actually got him." But Jack was already scanning, already looking for secondary threats, because Kane had taught him better than anyone that you never stop thinking just because you got your shot off. And sure enough, there they were, insurgents breaking cover all along the cliff line, their coordinated fire dissolving into chaos now that their spotter was gone, the PKM gunner trying to relocate, riflemen shooting wild instead of aimed, the whole ambush falling apart like a machine that had lost its central gear. The Marines, trained and professional despite their youth, recognized the shift immediately. Return fire intensified. The rear gun trucks M240 started to hit at actual targets instead of just suppressing fire. Jack heard whoops of victory, heard officers trying to maintain fire discipline, heard the sounds of men who had been sure they were going to die suddenly realizing they might live through this. Jack let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding and allowed himself one moment, just one, to feel something other than the fear and focus that had carried him through the last 5 minutes. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a small, cold certainty that he had done what needed doing, and that somewhere his wife was either proud or disappointed, and he would never know which. Then Ryan groaned, and Jack remembered that killing Kane meant exactly nothing if his son bled out in the dirt. He grabbed Martinez. "Get back to the truck. Tell them we need that medevac now, right now, and get me a corpsman if we have one still breathing." Martinez ran, and Jack turned his attention to Ryan's wound. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped. His son's eyes kept trying to close, his breathing shallow and irregular. Classic signs of declining mental status, probably from blood loss and shock and the head trauma that might be minor or might be catastrophic, and there was no way to know without equipment they didn't have. "Stay with me," Jack said, his hands working through the aid bag he had pulled from Ryan's gear. Gauze, pressure, tape. The basic tools of keeping people alive until someone smarter could take over. "You're going to be fine. Air support is 2 minutes out. We're going to get you home." Ryan's eyes focused on Jack's face with effort. "You shot him. The sniper. I saw you." "Yeah, 800 yards. Maybe more." Ryan's voice was getting weaker, but there was something in it that Jack hadn't heard in years. Something that might have been respect. "Nobody taught me you could shoot like that." Jack kept working, kept applying pressure, kept his hands busy so his heart wouldn't have time to break. "There's a lot nobody taught you, son. Maybe that's my fault." "Why didn't you tell me?" Ryan asked. And the question carried years of hurt and confusion and distance that no amount of gauze and tape could fix. "Why did you let me think you were just cargo? Just some supply guy who never did anything?" Before Jack could answer, before he could find words for a conversation that was 29 years overdue, the sound of rotors echoed through the valley. 2 Apache helicopters screamed overhead, their 30-millimeter chain guns already firing at the remaining insurgent positions with the kind of overwhelming violence that made resistance a joke. Secondary explosions bloomed on the cliff faces as the Apaches found ammunition caches in fighting positions. Behind them came the Blackhawks, one for medevac and one carrying the quick reaction force that was probably too late to fight, but right on time to save the survivors. The next 30 minutes were a blur of activity that Jack experienced from a strange distance, like he was watching it happen to someone else. Corpsmen swarming Ryan's position, a litter appearing from somewhere, his son being loaded onto it with the kind of careful urgency that meant the medics were worried, but trying not to show it. Jack trying to stay with him, being pushed back by professionals who had this handled. Watching the Black Hawk lift off with his son inside and disappearing toward the base hospital. Sergeant Major Briggs arrived with the QRF, his face carved from stone as he surveyed the carnage. 6 dead from the lead truck. 3 wounded from the rear truck, 1 critical. The fuel tanker was still burning, sending up a pillar of smoke visible for miles. And scattered across the valley floor were the bodies of insurgents who had learned the hard way that ambushing Marines was easier in theory than in practice. Briggs found Jack sitting against the boulder where he had made his shot, the M40A1 across his lap, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading and reality was setting in. "I heard what you did," Briggs said, lowering himself to the ground with a grunt that spoke to too many years carrying too much weight. 847 yards. Chen's people are measuring it now, with damaged equipment in this wind. He shook his head. "Jack, that's the kind of shot that makes instructor manuals." "Is Ryan going to be okay?" Jack asked, because that was the only question that mattered. "Docs think so. Concussion, blood loss, needs stitches and observation, but he'll live." Briggs paused. "You saved him. You saved a lot of people today." Jack looked at the M40A1, at the brass from the round that had finally found its purpose after 29 years. "I killed Kane," he said, and even saying it out loud felt strange, like a dream he wasn't sure he believed. "Yeah, about that." Briggs pulled out a satellite phone and showed Jack a photo on its screen. "Apache pilots took thermal imagery of the cliff after you shot. They found blood, found Kane's rifle, but they didn't find Kane." The photo showed a heat signature trail leading from the sniper position back into a cave system, 2 other signatures dragging a third between them. Kane's men, extracting their wounded leader while the Marines were dealing with their own casualties. "He's alive," Jack said flatly. "He's alive," Briggs confirmed. "Wounded, maybe badly, but alive. And now he knows you're here, knows you can still shoot, knows you're not just the cargo they think you are." He met Jack's eyes. "This isn't over, brother. Kane doesn't leave loose ends. You just moved yourself to the top of his target list." Jack looked at the valley, at the smoke still rising from burning vehicles, at the Marines recovering their dead and wounded. He thought about Ryan and surgery, about 29 years of running from a past that had finally caught up, about a wife who had asked him to tell the truth and a son who deserved to know who his father really was. "Good," Jack said. "I'm tired of hiding. Let him come." Briggs studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right then. But we do this smart. Chen's got intelligence on Kane's network. We know where he's been operating. And now that you've put a bullet in him, he's going to need medical care. We can use that." "What are you saying, Tom?" I'm saying maybe it's time to stop waiting for Kane to come to you. Maybe it's time to go finish what started in 91. For real this time. No courts-martial, no official investigations, just two old snipers settling accounts. Briggs stood, his knees popping loud enough to hear. Think about it, but think fast because Kane's thinking the same thing, and he's got a head start. The Black Hawk took Jack back to base an hour later, after the valley had been secured and the dead had been counted, and the after-action reports had begun their long journey through the bureaucratic machine that processed war into paperwork. Jack sat in the bird's web seating, his rifle between his knees, watching the mountains scroll past below and thinking about choices and consequences and the long road between who you were and who you became. His radio crackled with a transmission and on a frequency that shouldn't have been accessible to anyone outside official military channels. Static, then a voice, weak and tight with pain but still recognizable. "That was a hell of a shot, Jack," Kane said, each word costing him. "Center mass, punched right through my plate carrier where it was cracked. You always did know how to find the weak spot." Jack keyed his mic. "You're dying, Vince. Maybe, maybe not. But I'll live long enough to finish this. That's a promise, brother. You and me one more time, like the old days. The old days you betrayed 6 Marines and destroyed my life?" Kane laughed, and it turned into a cough that sounded wet and ugly. "Is that what you tell yourself? That I destroyed your life? Jack, I gave you a gift. I showed you what the Corps really thinks of people like us. Disposable. Forgettable. All that honor and sacrifice talk is just words they use to make you feel better about dying for oil money and political careers." "You're wrong," Jack said. "Am I? Then why have you spent 30 years counting bullets instead of firing them? Why does your own son look at you like you're a stranger? Why did you hide in the shadows while I made millions doing the same job we used to do together?" Another wet cough. "I didn't destroy your life, Jack. I just showed you the truth. What you did with that truth, that's on you." "Where are you, Kane?" "Close. Closer than you think. And getting medical attention from people who know how to keep their mouths shut." The transmission quality degraded like Kane was moving deeper into something that blocked signal. "Heal up, old friend. Get your head straight. Tell your boy whatever story makes you feel like less of a failure. And then come find me. We'll finish this properly, just you and me and the truth about who we really are." The transmission cut out, leaving Jack with static and the thump of helicopter rotors and a cold certainty that the next time he faced Vincent Kane, only one of them would walk away. The base hospital smelled like every military medical facility Jack had ever been in. Antiseptic trying to cover the metallic tang of blood, floor wax over concrete, and underneath it all, the particular odor of fear that no amount of cleaning could remove. He sat in the hallway outside surgery for 3 hours, still wearing his dusty uniform, still carrying the scent of cordite and diesel fuel, while doctors worked on Ryan behind doors he couldn't pass through. Other wounded came and went. The gut-shot Marine from the rear truck wheeled past on a gurney with tubes running in and out of him like some kind of medical octopus. 2 of the injured from the lead vehicle, one missing his left arm below the elbow, the other burned bad enough that Jack looked away. All of them younger than his son. All of them somebody's Ryan, bleeding in a country most Americans couldn't find on a map for reasons that changed depending on which politician you asked. Sergeant Major Briggs found him at hour 2, carrying 2 cups of coffee that had been brewed sometime during the previous administration and reheated until they achieved a consistency somewhere between motor oil and battery acid. "Drink," Briggs ordered, and Jack took the cup because following orders was easier than thinking. "Docs say Ryan's going to be fine. 16 stitches, mild concussion. Keep him for observation overnight, but he'll be released tomorrow." Jack nodded, not trusting his voice to work properly around the knot in his throat. Briggs settled into the plastic chair next to him with a grunt. They sat in silence for a while, 2 old warriors who had seen enough young men bleed that they didn't need words to communicate certain things. Finally, Briggs spoke. "Lieutenant Chen wants to debrief you. Official after action for the convoy. But there's something else." He pulled a tablet from his cargo pocket, brought up a series of photographs. Apache pilots found Kane's hide site after the shooting stopped. "You need to see this." The first image showed the sniper position from above, a natural depression in the rock face with perfect sight lines to the entire kill zone. Professional work, the kind of position you didn't stumble into, You planned for weeks in advance. The second image showed the blood trail Jack had seen on thermal. A lot of blood, more than a man should lose and still walk away. But Kane had always been too mean to die easy. The third image made Jack's hands clench around the coffee cup, hard enough to crack the foam. It was a photograph left pinned to the rock with a knife. The photo was old. You buy one again. It did, but Jack recognized it immediately because he had the same picture in his own footlocker back home. 7 Marines, 1991, somewhere in Iraq after a successful mission. Jack and Kane in the center, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like they owned the world. The 6 other Marines flanking them, young and alive, and completely unaware they had 2 weeks left to live. Someone had drawn a red X through each of the 6 dead Marines, had written dates next to their names. February 18th, 1991, the day Kane's betrayal had gotten them killed. But it was the message written across the bottom of the photo that made Jack's blood run cold. Your turn, brother. Same place it started. Come alone or more people die. You have 48 hours. Same place it started, Briggs repeated. That's Al-Hajra, Jack, the village where the ambush happened, where we lost the 6. Jack stared at the photograph, at the faces of men he had failed to save, at Kane's mocking message that turned their deaths into bait for a trap 3 decades in the making. It's suicide, Briggs said. Kane's wounded but not dead, which means he's holed up somewhere with his entire network around him. You go in there alone, you're not coming back. Then I don't go alone, Jack said. You're coming with me. Briggs shook his head slowly. Can't. Colonel's already got me on a flight back to Germany tomorrow. Some inspector general investigation into supply chain corruption. Convenient timing, right? His voice was bitter. Kane's got reach. People in places we don't know about. He's making sure I can't back you up. Then I get a team from who, Jack? Think about it. You tell command that Kane's alive, that he's baiting you, that you need to go after him. They'll want to know how you know Kane, want to know about the history. Next thing you know, you're in a debriefing room answering questions about 1991, and Kane disappears again. Briggs met his eyes. This is what he wants. You isolated, you alone, you making mistakes because you're emotional. So what do you suggest? I suggest you be smarter than him for once. Briggs pulled up another image on the tablet. This one, a satellite photo of a compound, maybe 10 clicks from Al-Hajra. Chen's been tracking this location for months. Heavy security, armed guards, and too much money moving through it for the region. She thinks it's Kane's headquarters. If you're going after him, that's where you start. Chen knows about Kane? Chen knows there's a high-value target coordinating insurgent activity in that sector. She doesn't know it's personal for you, doesn't know about the Gulf. Briggs leaned closer. I gave her a story, told her you'd been tracking this guy through supply chain intelligence, that you had a vendetta because he killed Marines under your watch. She bought it. Thinks you're some obsessed supply sergeant who can't let go. Not far from the truth, Jack said quietly. No, Briggs agreed. But here's the thing. Chen's putting together a raid on that compound, 72 hours from now. Official mission, full team, air support, the works. She wants you to go along as advisor because you know the target's tactics. That gives you cover, backup, and a legitimate reason to be there when you put a bullet in Kane's skull. Jack looked at the photograph again, at the faces of the dead, at Kane's taunt. He said 48 hours, the raid's in 72. So you stall him, send a message back, tell him you need more time to arrange transport, to get clear of base, whatever story keeps him waiting. Briggs tapped the tablet screen. Or you can do what he expects. Go in alone, angry, stupid, and end up as dead as those 6 Marines. Your call. The surgery doors opened and a doctor emerged, his scrubs marked with blood that might have been Ryan's or might have been one of the other wounded. He was young, maybe 30, with the kind of face that suggested he'd joined the military to pay off medical school debt and was now reconsidering every decision that had led him to this particular war. Sergeant Dalton, the doctor called. Your son's out of surgery. He's stable, awake, and asking for you. Jack stood, his joints popping loud enough to embarrass him in front of Briggs and the doctor and the handful of other people waiting for news about their own wounded. 58 years of hard living, announcing itself with every movement. Go, Briggs said. Talk to your boy. I'll work on stalling Kane and coordinating with Chen. He gripped Jack's shoulder. And Jack, maybe tell Ryan the truth this time. All of it. He deserves to know who his old man really is before you go do something that might get you killed. The recovery room was small and crowded with monitoring equipment that beeped and hummed and occasionally alarmed for reasons that seemed important to the nurses, but resulted in nothing more urgent than adjusting an IV drip. Ryan lay in a bed that looked too small for his frame, his head wrapped in bandages that made him look simultaneously vulnerable and absurd, like a child playing at being wounded. His eyes tracked Jack as he entered, clearer than they'd been in the dirt of Karak Valley, but still carrying that glassy quality of pain medication and residual concussion. "Hey, Dad," Ryan said, and there it was again. Dad, not Sergeant, not Sir. The word Jack had been trying to earn back for 3 years through silence and distance, and the careful maintenance of walls that protected them both from having to face uncomfortable truths. "Hey, son, how you feeling?" "Like someone hit me in the head with a truck." Ryan tried to smile, winced, gave up on the attempt. "Doc says I'm lucky. Another inch to the right and the shrapnel would have gone through my temple instead of just cutting a groove across my skull." Jack pulled up a chair, the same kind of uncomfortable plastic that seemed to be standard issue in every military facility worldwide, designed by someone who had never actually sat in one or hated everyone who did. "I saw what you did," Ryan said before Jack could figure out how to start the conversation he had been avoiding for 29 years. "Out there, the shot. Martinez told me while they were loading me up. Said you made an 800-yard kill with a rifle that shouldn't have even fired. That you saved his life and mine and probably everyone's." "Martinez talks too much. Maybe. Or maybe he talks exactly enough." Ryan shifted in the bed, trying to find a position that didn't make his head pound. "I spent 3 years thinking you were a coward. Thinking you'd washed out of real duty and ended up counting ball heads because you couldn't hack it on the line. And then I find out you're some kind of legend sniper who just never bothered to mention it." "It's complicated," Jack said, which was what people said when the truth was too ugly to share and lies wouldn't stick. "Uncomplicated," Ryan said. "I almost died today. You almost died. I think that earns me some honesty." So Jack told him, not everything, not the whole 3-decade saga of betrayal and shame and slow death by 1,000 small humiliations, but enough about being a scout sniper in the Gulf, about Kane, the spotter who had been closer than family until the day he sold out his brothers for money and power, about 6 Marines dying in an ambush that Jack should have seen coming and didn't, about a court-martial that cleared him legally but destroyed him professionally, about 29 years spent in logistics because no one would trust him with a rifle after Kane's carefully constructed story made Jack look like the incompetent one. Ryan listened without interrupting, his face cycling through expressions that Jack couldn't quite read. Shock, anger, confusion, understanding. And finally something that looked almost like grief for all the lost years between them. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ryan asked when Jack finished. "When I was a kid, when I asked about the war, why did you just shut down instead of explaining?" "Because I was ashamed," Jack said simply. "Because I let my best friend betray me and I didn't see it coming. Because 6 good men died on my watch and I couldn't prove it wasn't my fault. Because your mother asked me every year to tell you the truth and I was too much of a coward to do it." Mom knew? She knew everything. Knew about Kane, about the court-martial, about why I took every shit detail and every dead-end assignment without complaint. She kept asking me to explain it to you, and I kept saying next year when you're older, when you'd understand. Jack's voice cracked despite his best effort to keep it steady. Then she got sick, and there wasn't a next year anymore. The machines beeped their steady rhythm while Ryan processed this, his fingers picking at the edge of his blanket with the nervous energy of someone who wanted to pace but couldn't. "The sniper today," Ryan said finally. "The one you shot, that was Kane, wasn't it?" Jack nodded. "Did you kill him?" "I hit him. Center mass through his plate carrier. But he got away. His people extracted him while we were dealing with casualties." Jack pulled the tablet Briggs had given him, showed Ryan the photograph with its red X marks and mocking message. "Now he wants to finish it. Wants me to come alone to where it started, or he'll kill more people." Ryan stared at the photo for a long time, his jaw working like he was chewing on words too big to swallow. "You're going after him." "Yeah. When?" 3 days. There's a raid planned on his compound. Official operation, full team. I go with them, we get Kane, everyone goes home clean. And if Kane figures out you're not coming alone to his ambush, if he decides to make good on his threat and hurt people because you didn't follow his rules." Ryan met Jack's eyes. How many more Marines die because you wanted backup? It was the question Jack had been asking himself since Briggs showed him Kane's message. The calculation that made him understand why heroes in movies always went to meet the villain alone, even though tactically it made no sense. I don't know, Jack admitted, but I'm 58 years old, son. I'm not the operator I used to be. Going in alone against Kane and his whole network? That's not courage. That's suicide with extra steps. Or it's you finally doing what you should have done 30 years ago. Facing him, making him pay, getting justice for those 6 Marines and for Mom, and for every year we lost because you were too buried in shame to let anyone see who you really were. Ryan's voice was getting stronger. The pain medication not enough to dull the intensity of what he was feeling. You taught me that Marines don't leave their brothers behind, that we finish the fight no matter what. Was that all just words, or do you actually believe it? I believe it, Jack said quietly. But those 6 Marines from 91, they're already gone. I can't save them by getting myself killed. No, but you can honor them by making sure the man who murdered them doesn't get to walk away again. Ryan tried to sit up, grimaced, settled for raising his head slightly. Dad, listen to me. I spent my whole life thinking you were weak, thinking you'd given up. And now I find out you've been strong enough to carry this weight for 3 decades without breaking. Strong enough to save my life, even when I treated you like garbage. Strong enough to make an impossible shot under impossible conditions because it was the right thing to do. Don't lose that strength now by being cautious. Be the Marine you taught me to be. Finish the fight. Jack wanted to argue, wanted to explain that bravery and stupidity looked identical from certain angles. That getting yourself killed didn't make you a hero, that Ryan was still concussed and hopped up on morphine and would probably feel differently once his head cleared. But he also remembered Sarah in the hospital, remembered her asking him to tell the truth, remembered her last words about being the man Ryan needed instead of the ghost he'd become. If I do this, Jack said slowly, if I go after Kane alone, there's a good chance I don't come back. I know. And if I don't come back, you'll be alone. No parents, no family except whatever you build for yourself. I know that too, Ryan said. But Dad, I've been alone for 3 years, even with you sitting in the same base. I'd rather have one memory of you being brave than a lifetime of you being safe but broken. The words hit harder than Jack expected. A truth he'd been hiding from delivered with the blunt force of youth that hadn't learned to soften blows yet. A nurse came in to check Ryan's vitals, giving Jack an excuse to step out into the hallway where the air seemed easier to breathe. He walked to the end of the corridor, found a window that looked out over the base, watched young Marines going about their duties in the fading afternoon light. Some of them were probably the same ones who had called him cargo, who had mocked him, who had no idea that the supply sergeant they dismissed had just saved their entire convoy from being wiped out. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Just GPS coordinates and 2 words, 48 hours. Kane reminding him the clock was ticking. Jack pulled up his contacts, found Lieutenant Chen's number. The call connected after 2 rings. Chen, Lieutenant, this is Sergeant Dalton. I need to talk to you about accelerating the raid timeline. There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. The compound operation? Sergeant, we're still gathering intelligence. Moving up the timeline could compromise. I have intelligence, Jack interrupted. The target is wounded, hit hard in the convoy ambush today. He's vulnerable right now, but if we wait 72 hours, he'll either be healed enough to fight or evacuated to a location we can't touch. It has to be now, tomorrow night at the latest. Another pause, longer this time. Jack could almost hear Chen running calculations, weighing risks against opportunities, trying to decide if she could trust the obsessed supply sergeant who had just proven he was a lot more than his paperwork suggested. What else aren't you telling me, Sergeant? That this target isn't just coordinating insurgent attacks. He's a former Marine, scout sniper, Gulf War era. Went rogue in 91, has been selling his skills to the highest bidder ever since. He's personal for me because he got 6 of my friends killed and walked away clean. Jack kept his voice level, professional, the story Briggs had crafted. I've been tracking him for years through supply chain analysis. He's the reason I stayed in logistics. I knew eventually he'd need weapons, ammunition, equipment, and I could find him through the flow of materials. It was close enough to the truth that Jack almost believed it himself. And you just happened to be on the convoy he ambushed today, Chen said, skepticism clear in her voice. No, ma'am. I volunteered for that convoy because I knew he was operating in that sector. I was hoping for exactly what happened, that he'd expose himself and I could take him down. You used yourself as bait. Yes, ma'am. Chen was quiet for so long Jack thought the call had dropped. Then, I'll talk to the colonel, see if we can move assets into position for a raid tomorrow night. But Sergeant, if this goes sideways, if your personal vendetta compromises my mission, I will personally see to it that you spend the rest of your career cleaning latrines in Alaska. Clear? Crystal, ma'am. Good. Briefing at 600 tomorrow. Don't be late. The call ended, leaving Jack staring at his phone and wondering if he'd just made the smartest decision of his life or signed his own death warrant. He went back to Ryan's room. His son was asleep, the medication and exhaustion finally overcoming the excitement of the day. Jack stood there for a long time, watching Ryan breathe, memorizing the shape of his face in case tomorrow night went as badly as it probably would. I'm going to finish it, Jack whispered to his sleeping son. For you, for Mom, for the six, and for me, because I'm tired of being a ghost. He left before Ryan could wake up and ask him to stay. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of preparation that felt both urgent and dreamlike. Jack returned to his quarters, pulled out the footlocker that contained everything left from his old life. The photographs of Sarah, the medals he'd never displayed, the citation for marksmanship from sniper school, and underneath it all, wrapped in oilcloth, his old ghillie suit from the Gulf War. It still fit, more or less, though 30 years had added bulk in places that made the webbing bind. He spent 2 hours updating it with local vegetation, turning himself into something that could disappear into the Afghan landscape the way he used to disappear into Iraqi desert. The M40A1 got a complete teardown and rebuild. Every part inspected, cleaned, reassembled with the care of a man who knew his life would depend on this weapon functioning perfectly at the worst possible moment. The scope was still damaged, still unreliable, but Jack had learned in Karak Valley that his instinct could compensate for equipment failures. Sometimes the old ways, the ways his grandfather had taught him before optics were trustworthy, those were the ways that saved you. He loaded magazines, checked his plate carrier, updated his will, wrote a letter to Ryan that he hoped his son would never have to read. All the small rituals of a man preparing to step off the edge of the world and hoping his parachute would open. At 0400, before dawn and before the briefing, Jack walked to the small base chapel. He wasn't religious, hadn't been since Sarah died, and he realized that either God didn't exist or didn't care, and both options were equally depressing. But the chapel was quiet and empty and felt like neutral ground between who he had been and who he was about to become. He sat in a pew that creaked under his weight and looked at the simple cross on the wall and tried to find words for what he was feeling. Fear, determination, regret for all the years wasted. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he could do this one last thing right. I don't know if you're listening, Jack said to the empty room, but if you are, if there's anything left of Sarah up there with you, tell her I'm sorry it took me this long. Tell her I'm trying to be the man she deserved. And if I don't make it back, tell her to take care of Ryan. He's going to need someone. The chapel didn't answer because chapels never did, but Jack felt marginally better for having said it out loud. The mission briefing at 0600 was all business. Lieutenant Chen stood at the front of the ready room with satellite imagery and intelligence reports and the kind of confident competence that made young officers either excellent or dead before their time. 20 Marines from Bravo Company, including some who had survived yesterday's convoy. They looked at Jack differently now, not with mockery, not with dismissal, with something closer to respect, or at least the acknowledgement that the old supply sergeant had depths they hadn't suspected. Primary objective, Chen said, pointing to the compound on the satellite image. High-value target believed to be wounded and recovering at this location. Secondary objective, capture intelligence on insurgent networks operating in this sector. Tertiary objective, we all come home alive. She ran through the plan with brutal efficiency. Insertion by helicopter, 8 clicks from target. Overland approach on foot. Breach at 0200 hours when guard shifts changed and attention was lowest. Secure the compound room by room, and extract with the target or his body. Simple in theory, catastrophic in practice if anything went wrong. Sergeant Dalton will be accompanying us as specialist advisor, Chen continued, and Jack felt 20 pairs of eyes turned toward him. He has intelligence on the target's tactics and capabilities. His recommendations during the operation carry the same weight as mine. Clear? A chorus of yes ma'am from Marines who 12 hours ago wouldn't have trusted Jack to count their bullets correctly. One more thing, Chen said, and her voice dropped into a register that made everyone sit up straighter. This target is not your standard insurgent. He's former military, highly trained, and according to Sergeant Dalton, extremely dangerous even when wounded. Do not underestimate him. Do not give him chances. Do not hesitate if you have a shot, because he won't hesitate with you. After the briefing, as Marines dispersed to prepare their gear, Chen pulled Jack aside. I did some digging last night, she said quietly. Called in favors, accessed files I probably shouldn't have access to. Found the court-martial from '91. Found the incident report about 6 Marines K-1A in an ambush. Found a lot of redacted sections and a note that the case was closed by order of someone way above my pay grade. Jack kept his face neutral. And I think you've been lying to me about why this is personal. I think there's a whole story you're not telling, and under normal circumstances, I'd have you pulled from this mission until you came clean. She met his eyes. But we're not in normal circumstances. We're in a situation where your personal vendetta happens to align with military objectives, and I'm pragmatic enough to use that. So here's the deal. You help me get this target, you follow my orders, you don't do anything that gets my Marines killed, and afterward, we can have a conversation about what really happened in 1991. Fair? Fair, Jack agreed, because it was the best deal he was going to get and they both knew it. Good. Because, Sergeant, if you're planning something stupid like going rogue and trying to handle this alone, I will shoot you myself before I let you compromise my operation. We clear? Crystal, ma'am. Chen studied him for another moment, then nodded. Wheels up at 1800 hours. Be ready. Jack spent the rest of the day doing the 1,000 small tasks that filled the hours before missions, eating meals he didn't taste, checking equipment he'd already checked, trying not to think about Ryan still recovering in the hospital, or Sarah's voice asking him to be brave, or the 6 Marines from 1991 who deserved better than they got. At 1600, Sergeant Major Briggs found him in the armory, making final adjustments to the M40A1. Heard you moved up the timeline, Briggs said. Chen's good, but she's not ready for Kane. None of them are. I know. You got a plan for when it goes sideways? Not really, Jack admitted. I figure I'll improvise. Briggs pulled something from his pocket, set it on the workbench. It was a radio, encrypted, off book. Kane's frequency, the one he used to taunt you yesterday. You get in trouble, you need an exit, you call on this. I'll be monitoring. I thought you were flying to Germany. I am. Right after I make sure you were not about to do something catastrophically stupid without backup. Briggs gripped Jack's shoulder. 30 years we've carried this, brother. 30 years of Kane walking free while good men paid the price. Tonight that ends. But it ends with you coming home, not as a hero, not as a martyr, just as a Marine who finished his mission and lived to tell about it. Copy? Copy, Jack said, though they both knew he was lying. At 17:30, Jack stopped by the hospital one more time. Ryan was awake, sitting up, color better but still looking like he'd had a bad argument with an IED and lost. You're going tonight, Ryan said, not a question. Yeah. You gonna do something stupid? Probably. Ryan smiled despite the pain it caused. That's the most honest answer you've given me in years. He pulled something from under his pillow, held it out. Dog tags. Sarah's dog tags. The ones she'd worn when she was Army Reserve before they met, before marriage and cancer and the long, slow fade. Mom wanted you to have these back, Ryan said. She told me before she died, said if you ever found your courage again, I should give them to you, said you'd know what it meant. Jack took the tags with hands that shook slightly. He remembered giving them to Sarah the day they got married. Remembered her wearing them on their honeymoon. Remembered her taking them off the day she went into hospice and asking Ryan to keep them safe. She knew you'd do this someday, Ryan continued. Knew you'd stop running and face whatever you'd been hiding from. She just hoped she'd be alive to see it. I'm sorry she's not, Jack said. Me too, but Dad, make it count. Come back. Don't make her sacrifice for nothing by getting yourself killed over something that happened before I was born. Jack put the dog tags around his neck, feeling the weight of them settle against his chest like armor made of memory and promise. I'll do my best, he said, and meant it. At 1800 hours precisely, Jack climbed into the Black Hawk with 19 Marines who were young enough to be his children and one lieutenant who was smart enough to be dangerous. The helicopter lifted off into a sky painted purple and gold by sunset, carrying them toward a compound where Vincent Kane waited with wounded pride and 3 decades of hatred. Jack checked his rifle one last time, felt Sarah's dog tags cold against his skin, and let himself imagine for just a moment that this might actually work. That he might finish what Kane started in 1991. That he might finally, after 30 years of purgatory, earn the right to look his own reflection in the eye without flinching. Then the helicopter dropped into tactical flight mode, nap of the earth flying that made his stomach protest, and there was no more time for imagination. Only the mission, only the math of violence, and the hope that when the numbers finally came due, Jack Dalton would be standing on the right side of the equation. The desert scrolled beneath them, ancient and indifferent, while overhead the stars came out one by one to watch what happened next. The helicopter touched down 8 clicks from target in a wadi deep enough to hide the bird from casual observation, but shallow enough that scrambling out didn't require rappelling gear. Jack's knees protested the jump to the ground, 58 years of accumulated damage making themselves known, despite the adrenaline already flooding his system. Around him, 20 Marines moved with the efficient silence of men who had done this dance before, checking weapons and adjusting night vision and becoming something more than individuals and less than human, in that way soldiers did when violence was imminent. Lieutenant Chen materialized next to Jack as the helicopter lifted off, rotor wash kicking up dust that turned the world into a swirling brown cloud for 30 seconds. "You good, Sergeant?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the fading thump of the Black Hawk. Jack nodded, not trusting his voice yet. His hands were steady on the M40A1, but his heart was running faster than it should, the peculiar cocktail of fear and anticipation that every warrior learned to manage but never quite conquered. The patrol moved out in standard formation, Chen's team having done this enough times that they flowed across the terrain like water finding the path of least resistance. Jack found himself in the middle of the column, protected and observed in equal measure. Chen trusted him enough to bring him along, but not enough to let him operate independently. Smart woman. The 8 clicks took 2 hours of tactical movement through terrain that wanted to kill them with every step. Loose shale that could turn an ankle or announce your presence with a cascade of noise. Wadis that looked shallow until you stepped in them and found yourself chest deep in sand. The constant scan for tripwires, pressure plates, or the disturbed earth that marked IED emplacement. All of it done under night vision that turned the world into shades of green and robbed depth perception in ways that could be fatal. Jack's mind kept circling back to the photograph Kane had left. The 6 Marines with red X marks through their faces. The mocking message about finishing what started. The casual cruelty of using dead men as bait. Kane had always been good at finding what hurt most and applying pressure until something broke. 30 years hadn't dulled that particular skill. They reached the observation point at 1:30 hours, a ridgeline that gave clear sight of Kane's compound 400 yards below. Through night vision and the thermal scope Chen passed him, Jack could see the layout clearly. Main building, 2 stories, reinforced construction that spoke to money and planning. 3 outbuildings that were probably guard barracks, vehicle storage, and ammunition storage based on their size and spacing. A perimeter wall 10 feet high with guard towers at 3 corners. Professional security, the kind that didn't come cheap or easy in this part of Afghanistan. "Count 12 guards visible," Chen whispered, studying the compound through her own optics. "Thermal shows maybe 20 more heat signatures inside buildings. We're looking at 30-plus hostiles, possibly more if there are cold spots we can't see." "Kane's inside the main building," Jack said, his certainty born from 3 decades of knowing how his former friend thought. "Second floor, corner room with best sight lines to all approaches. He'll have escape routes planned, probably tunnels or dead space in the walls. He doesn't go anywhere without multiple exits." "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." Jack pointed to a section of wall on the north side. "That's where your breach team should hit. Furthest from his room, gives us the most time before he knows we're inside. But have a secondary team ready at the south wall in case he runs, because he will run. Kane's not the type to make a last stand when escape is an option." Chen studied the compound for another minute, then keyed her radio. "All teams, this is actual. Primary breach on north wall at my command. Secondary team positions on south wall for squirters. Rules of engagement are weapons free on armed hostiles, but I want the primary target alive if possible. He's worth more to intel breathing than dead. The assault teams moved into position with the silent efficiency of men who had rehearsed this dozens of times. Jack watched them flow down the ridge and across open ground, using terrain and darkness and the guards' own patterns against them. It was beautiful in its own terrible way, the choreography of violence performed by artists who had spent years perfecting their craft. At precisely 0200 hours, when the guard shifts were changing and attention was at its lowest, Chen gave the command. The breaching charge on the north wall was designed to create maximum shock with minimum warning. 1 second there was a wall, the next second there was a hole and Marines pouring through it with rifle lights cutting the darkness into geometric shapes. Jack heard shouting in Pashto, then the distinctive crack of M4 rifles as the assault team engaged targets. Jack moved with Chen's command element through the breach, his role officially as advisor, but in practice as the old man trying to keep up with younger, faster operators who could clear rooms without thinking about it. The first floor of the main building was chaos in the way all close quarters battle became chaos. Too many people moving too fast in too little space with too much on the line. Insurgents in various states of dress and readiness, some fighting back with AK-47s and pistols, others trying to surrender, still others just trying to survive the next 30 seconds. The Marines handled it with brutal professionalism. Rooms cleared, hallways secured, bodies dropped or cuffed depending on whether they pose a threat. Jack let them work, his attention focused on finding the stairs to the second floor and the confrontation he had been building toward for 3 decades. He found the stairwell at the same moment he heard Chen's voice over the radio, tight with urgency. All teams be advised. We have a runner. Primary target is mobile, heading toward the south wall. Secondary team, lock down that sector. Jack was moving before his conscious mind caught up, taking stairs 2 at a time in a way that was going to hurt later if he survived to have a later. The second floor hallway was dark, doors closed, and somewhere ahead he could hear movement. Not the sound of guards or insurgents, the particular rhythm of someone who knew exactly where they were going and didn't have time to be careful about noise. Kane. Jack cleared the first room, empty. Second room, a fighter trying to arm himself who went down to a double tap that Jack fired on pure instinct. Third room, and there at the window, silhouetted against the night, was a figure Jack would have recognized anywhere. Vincent Kane stood with his back to the door, working at the window frame with hands that moved despite the visible pain. Blood stained the right side of his shirt, the wound from Karak Valley reopened or never properly healed. He was thinner than Jack remembered, his hair gone gray in places it hadn't been 30 years ago. But the shoulders were the same. The posture was the same. The absolute certainty in his movements was the same. "Hello, Vince," Jack said, his rifle up and centered on Kane's spine. Kane froze, then slowly turned with his hands visible and empty. The smile that crossed his face was the same one from 1991, cocky and knowing and utterly without fear. "Jack," Kane said, like they were old friends meeting for coffee instead of enemies meeting at gunpoint, "I was wondering if you'd have the balls to come yourself or if you'd hide behind Chen's team. Hands up, on your knees, you know the drill." "Do I?" Kane made no move to comply. "See, the way I remember it, you were always the one following rules. I was the one who understood that rules are just suggestions for people too scared to take what they want." Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. The 4.5 pounds of pressure that separated talking from killing, suddenly feeling very light. 6 Marines are dead because of you. My career is destroyed because of you. My family fell apart because of you. Give me one reason I shouldn't end this right now." "Because you want to know why," Kane said simply. "Because for 30 years you've been asking yourself what you did wrong, what you missed, how your best friend could betray you so completely. And I'm the only one who can tell you." It was true, and they both knew it. Jack had played that night in 1991, over in his head 10,000 times, looking for the moment where he should have seen the betrayal coming, looking for the sign he missed, looking for the failure that was his own fault instead of Kane's choice. "Talk fast," Jack said. "Before I decide answers aren't worth keeping you alive." Kane leaned against the window frame, his movement casual despite the rifle pointed at his chest. "You remember Sergeant Major Williams, our platoon sergeant in the Gulf? What about him? He came to me 6 months into deployment, told me there were people back home willing to pay serious money for intelligence on Iraqi positions, supply lines, troop movements. And all I had to do was share what we learned on our recon missions. Easy money, victimless crime. The war was already won, he said. What difference did it make if some third party knew what we knew? Jack felt something cold settle in his stomach. Williams was running you. Williams was running a lot of people, but yeah, I was his prize asset, scout sniper team with access to everything command didn't want the enemy to know. I fed him intel for 4 months, collected nice deposits to an offshore account, thought I was being smart. Kane's smile turned bitter. Then Williams got greedy, started selling to both sides. Iraqi intelligence got wind of it, decided to send a message by setting up an ambush based on information Williams had provided. Our team, our brothers, 6 dead Marines as a warning to anyone else thinking about playing both sides. You could have told someone, Jack said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Could have come clean, stopped it before they died. Could have, Kane agreed. But by then I was in too deep. Williams made it clear that if I talked, if I tried to stop it, I'd go down too. Court-martial, Leavenworth, dishonorable discharge, everything I'd worked for gone. So I made a choice. I helped set you up to take the fall, planted evidence that made you look careless, made it seem like you'd compromised our position through bad operational security. He met Jack's eyes without flinching. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not sorry either. It was you or me, brother, and I chose me. The words hung in the air between them. 30 years of wondering answered in a confession that made everything worse instead of better. Because knowing the truth didn't change what happened, didn't bring back the 6 Marines, didn't restore Jack's career, didn't give him back the decades he'd lost to shame and silence. What happened to Williams, Jack asked. Dead. Killed in a training accident 3 months after the court-martial. At least that's what the official report said. Kane's smile was sharp enough to cut. Unofficially, someone decided he was a liability. Someone made sure he couldn't talk about who else was involved in his little side business. I was smart enough to disappear before that same someone decided I was a liability too. And you've been doing this for 30 years, selling intelligence? Getting people killed for money? I've been surviving, Kane corrected. Same as you. We just chose different methods. You decided to punish yourself by becoming a supply sergeant. I decided to profit from the same system that chewed us up and spit us out. Neither of us are heroes, Jack. We're just 2 old soldiers who learned the wrong lessons from the same war. The sound of boots in the hallway announced Chen's arrival before she appeared in the doorway, her rifle tracking past Jack to center on Kane. Sergeant Dalton, step aside, she ordered. Target is secured. But Jack didn't move. Couldn't move because something Kane had said was circling in his mind like a shark. Someone had killed Williams. Someone with enough pull to make it look like an accident. Someone who had been involved in the intelligence selling operation and wanted to tie off loose ends. Who killed Williams, Vince? Kane laughed, a sound without humor. You really want to open that box? You want to know how high this goes? Trust me, brother, ignorance is safer than the truth. Tell me. You're Colonel Hardwick, Kane said, and the words landed like artillery. He was a captain back then, Williams' commanding officer. He was the one organizing the whole thing, taking his cut from every piece of intelligence that got sold. When the ambush happened and 6 Marines died, he panicked. Had Williams killed, had me disappear, and spent the next 30 years rising through the ranks while you rotted in supply because you were the perfect scapegoat. A failed sniper, nobody would believe, even if you tried to tell the truth. Chen's rifle wavered slightly, and Jack knew she was doing the same math he was. Hardwick was the base commander, the man who had signed off on this raid, the man who had access to every operational detail, every intelligence report, every movement of personnel. The man who would know Chen was here now about to capture Kane alive. Jack's radio crackled with a transmission that confirmed his worst fear. All teams, this is Hardwick. You are weapons free on all targets in the compound. I say again, weapons free. No prisoners. Sanitize the objective and extract immediately. Chen's eyes went wide. Sir, we have the primary target contained. We can take him alive for interrogation. Negative, Hardwick's voice came back, cold and final. Intel value is compromised. All targets are to be eliminated. That is a direct order, Lieutenant. And there it was. 30 years of conspiracy threatening to unravel because Jack had finally found Kane. And Hardwick couldn't risk what his former partner might say if he made it to an interrogation room. He's going to kill us all, Kane said conversationally. Everyone who knows the truth. You, me, Chen, every Marine on this raid. He'll call it a tragedy, say we were overrun by insurgent reinforcements. Make sure there are no survivors to contradict his story. You're lying, Chen said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Then why did he just order you to execute a wounded, unarmed prisoner? Why is he demanding you sanitize the objective instead of securing intelligence? Why does he want everyone dead instead of bringing them back for exploitation? Kane's grin was savage. Face it, Lieutenant. Your commander just marked you all for death. Jack's mind was racing, calculating odds and outcomes. The assault teams were spread throughout the compound, focused on clearing rooms and securing prisoners. If Hardwick had positioned assets outside, if he had drones or artillery, or another team waiting to sweep through and kill everyone, the Marines in this building wouldn't stand a chance. But there was another possibility, a slim one, a desperate one, but the only play they had left. Chen, Jack said quietly, how good is your relationship with your pilots? Better than my relationship with Hardwick, she said, catching on immediately. Why, Ma? Because we need immediate extract, right now, before whoever Hardwick has positioned around this compound can execute whatever he's planned. Chen was already on her radio, switching to the aviation frequency. Nightbird 2, this is ground actual. We need emergency extract at primary objective. How copy? The response came back confused but professional. Ground actual, say again. Colonel Hardwick ordered us to hold at rally point until cleanup was complete. Negative, Nightbird. We have wounded and time-sensitive intel. I need you on the ground at the compound in 5 minutes or less. That's a direct order from your mission commander. A pause, then. Copy, ground actual, inbound your position, 5 minutes. Kane was still leaning against the window, watching this play out with the detached amusement of a man who had stopped caring about his own survival years ago. You're not going to make it, he said. Hardwick's had 30 years to plan for this contingency. He's got artillery pre-registered on this compound. He's got drones overhead with Hellfires ready to launch. The second those helicopters land, he's going to light this place up and make it look like an insurgent ambush went wrong. Then we don't give him the chance, Jack said. He grabbed Kane by his wounded shoulder, making the older man hiss in pain. You want to survive the next 5 minutes? You help us get out of here. You know Hardwick's playbook. You know how he thinks. Where are his kill assets positioned? Kane's eyes narrowed, calculating his own odds. There's a reason I picked this compound, Jack. Tunnels, 3 of them, leading to different exits outside the wall. I was heading for one when you interrupted our reunion. Show us. Why would I do that? I could just wait for you all to die, then slip out on my own. Jack pressed the muzzle of his M40A1 against Kane's wounded side, exactly where the bullet from Karak Valley had punched through. Because if you don't, I'm going to make sure you die slow and painful instead of quick and clean. Your choice. Kane's grin never faltered, but something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe, of the man Jack used to be before 30 years of shame had dulled his edges. There's the sniper I remember, the one who could make hard calls when necessary. I wondered if he was still in there. The tunnel, Vince, now. Kane pushed off from the window with a grunt of pain and led them to a rug in the corner of the room. Underneath was a trap door that opened onto narrow stairs descending into darkness. The tunnel below was crude but functional, just wide enough for a man to move through single file, reinforced with timber that suggested it had been here for years. Chen got her teams organized with the efficiency of someone who knew their survival depended on speed. Casualties were carried. Prisoners were secured with zip ties. Equipment was grabbed. Within 3 minutes, the entire assault force was moving through the tunnel system like rats abandoning a sinking ship. They emerged 200 yards outside the compound wall, just as the first Hellfire missile screamed in from a drone overhead. The explosion turned the main building into a fireball that lit up the night sky like a small sun. Secondary explosions followed as the ammunition storage cooked off, sending shockwaves that Jack felt in his chest even at this distance. The helicopters were already landing, rotors screaming, side doors open, and crew chiefs waving them aboard with urgent hand signals. Jack watched his Marines load the wounded first, then the prisoners, then themselves in the kind of organized chaos that training drilled into you until it became instinct. He kept his grip on Kane's collar, dragging the older man toward the nearest bird. Kane was laughing through the pain, a manic sound that barely carried over the rotor noise and explosions. You see it now, don't you? Kane shouted. You see what I've been telling you for 30 years? The system doesn't care about us. They'll kill us all to protect their secrets. Jack shoved Kane into the helicopter hard enough to make him stumble. Chen was already inside, coordinating with the pilots. The bird started to lift before Jack even had his feet fully on the deck, rising fast and angling away from the compound. Through the open door, Jack watched as more missiles rained down on the compound, systematically destroying every building, every piece of evidence, every sign that this had been anything other than a successful raid that unfortunately encountered more resistance than expected. Hardwick was erasing his past, eliminating witnesses, and he would have succeeded if Chen hadn't trusted her pilots more than her commander. The flight back to base took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Jack sat across from Kane, watching the man who had destroyed his life sit cuffed and wounded, and still somehow smiling like he had won something. "What happens now?" Kane asked. "You going to turn me over to Hardwick? Let him finish what he started?" "No," Jack said. "We're going to do something you never had the courage for. We're going to tell the truth." Kane's smile finally faltered. "The truth gets people killed, Jack. Gets you disappeared. Gets you erased from history like you never existed." "Maybe," Jack agreed, "but I'm tired of hiding. Tired of carrying shame for crimes I didn't commit. And I think Lieutenant Chen is tired of commanders who treat their Marines as expendable assets." Chen looked up from her radio, met Jack's eyes, and nodded once. She had been listening. She had been recording. And she was angry in the way that smart, competent people got angry when they realized they had been used. "My pilots are diverting to the CIA station at Bagram," she said. "I've got friends there who won't ask questions until we're secure. Hardwick will think we died in the compound. That gives us maybe 12 hours before he realizes we made it out. 12 hours to build a case, gather evidence, and make enough noise that he can't just make us disappear." "You're betting your career on this," Kane observed. "Betting all your lives. And for what? Justice? Truth? Those are just words, Lieutenant. They don't mean anything when powerful people decide they don't." "They mean something to me," Chen said. "And they meant something to 6 Marines who died in 1991 because people like you and Colonel Hardwick decided profit was more important than honor." The helicopter banked hard, changing course for Bagram, and Jack felt Sarah's dog tags shift against his chest. He thought about his wife asking him to tell the truth. Thought about Ryan in the hospital bed, telling him to finish the fight. Thought about 30 years of silence that had protected exactly nobody and accomplished nothing except letting evil men prosper while good men suffered. "Vince," Jack said quietly, "you're going to tell them everything. Every name, every operation, every piece of the network that got our brothers killed. And in exchange, I'll make sure you live long enough to see Hardwick in the cell next to yours." Kane studied him for a long moment and then slowly nodded. "You really have changed, Jack. The man I knew in 91 would have just shot me and been done with it." "The man you knew in 91 died when you betrayed him," Jack said. "I'm what's left. And what's left is a father who wants to go home to his son, a Marine who wants to honor his brothers, and a husband who wants to keep the promise he made to his wife." He leaned closer. "So you're going to help me do all 3, or I'm going to throw you out of this helicopter and tell everyone you tried to escape. Your choice." Kane's laugh was bitter and broken. "Hell of a thing, brother. Hell of a thing when the moral one becomes the ruthless one, and the ruthless one just wants to survive. I think we both lost something in the Gulf." "No," Jack corrected. "You lost your honor. I just misplaced mine for a while. But I'm taking it back now, whether you help or not." The lights of Bagram appeared on the horizon, a small constellation of human defiance against the vast darkness of the Afghan night. Chen was on the radio, calling in favors, activating networks of her own that Jack didn't know existed. Around them, Marines who had trusted their commander and nearly died for that trust were coming to terms with the fact that the enemy wasn't always the one shooting at you from the outside. Jack closed his eyes, felt the vibration of the helicopter through his bones, and allowed himself to believe for the first time in 3 decades that maybe, just maybe, this was actually going to work. Then his radio crackled with a transmission and on the frequency Briggs had given him, and Colonel Hardwick's voice cut through the static like a knife. "Sergeant Dalton, I know you are alive. I know you have Kane, and I know exactly what you think you're going to do." A pause, heavy with menace. "But you need to understand something. I have resources you can't imagine, reach you can't comprehend, and I have something else. Your son. Ryan's been transferred from the hospital to a secure location. If you want to see him again, you'll bring me Kane and whatever evidence you think you have. You have 2 hours. Otherwise, Ryan has a very unfortunate accident during his recovery. The transmission ended, leaving Jack staring at the radio with a cold fury that made his hands shake. Chen had heard it too. Her face was pale in the dim cabin light. He's bluffing. He has to be bluffing. But Jack knew better. Knew that men like Hardwick didn't bluff, didn't make threats they couldn't back up, didn't leave loose ends that could destroy them. Kane, Jack said, his voice flat and dead. How many people in Hardwick's network? How deep does this go? Kane's expression was grim. Deep enough that he can make a patient disappear from a military hospital. Deep enough that he can call in favors from people who make problems go away permanently. Deep enough that your son is already dead unless you give Hardwick what he wants. The helicopter flew on through the darkness while Jack calculated odds that all came out the same way. He could save Kane, could expose Hardwick, could get justice for the 6 Marines who died in 1991, or he could save his son. But the math that mattered, the only equation that had ever truly mattered, was that Ryan was alive and Jack would burn the whole world down before he let his son pay for his father's choices. Chen, Jack said quietly, I need you to turn this bird around. She looked at him like he was crazy. Sergeant, if we go back, I know, but it's Ryan, it's my son, and I can't save everyone, but I can save him. Jack met her eyes. I'm sorry, I know this cost you everything, but he's my boy. Chen held his gaze for a long moment, then slowly nodded and reached for her radio to redirect the pilots. Kane shook his head sadly. And there it is, the same choice I made 30 years ago. You instead of the mission. Family instead of honor. Hardwick wins again, Jack, just like he always does. Maybe, Jack said, chambering around in his M40A1 with hands that were finally terribly steady. Or maybe I'm done playing by rules that were rigged from the start. Maybe it's time to make Hardwick understand that some fathers are more dangerous than any conspiracy. The helicopter banked hard, turning back toward the base and whatever waited there. Jack checked his rifle one more time and prepared to do what he should have done 30 years ago. Not the honorable thing, not the right thing. Just the only thing that mattered when the man you loved most was in danger and the world was trying to take him away. The helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Phantom at 0347 hours. 3 hours before dawn would paint the mountains gold and reveal whatever hell Hardwick had prepared for them. Jack was first off the bird, his boots hitting tarmac while the rotors were still screaming their metallic song. Around him, Chen's Marines deployed in defensive positions, weapons up and scanning for threats that could come from anywhere because, when your own commander wanted you dead, the entire base became enemy territory. Colonel Hardwick was awaiting 50 yards from the landing pad, standing in a pool of light from a nearby hangar with the kind of casual confidence that came from believing you had already won. He was alone, which meant either he was supremely confident or supremely stupid, and Jack had not survived 58 years by underestimating his enemies. Sergeant Dalton, Hardwick called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. I'm glad you decided to be reasonable. Where's Kane? Jack walked forward slowly, his M40A1 slung but ready, his hands visible but close to the weapon. Behind him, he could feel Chen and her team maintaining their positions, creating a perimeter that was half security and half statement that they were not going to be disappeared quietly into the Afghan night. Where's my son? Jack asked. Safe, for now, in a location where my people are keeping him comfortable. But his continued safety depends entirely on your next choices. Hardwick's smile was the kind politicians wore when promising things they had no intention of delivering. Give me Kane. Give me whatever recordings or evidence Chen thinks she has. And everyone goes home happy. You get Ryan back. Chen gets to keep her career. The Marines who survive tonight get to stay survived. Simple transaction. Nothing about this is simple, Jack said, close enough now to see the details of Hardwick's face. The man was 63, his career a monument to advancement through connections rather than competence. Jack had served under men like him before. Officers who saw enlisted personnel as disposable resources, who made decisions in air-conditioned offices that got people killed in deserts and mountains and jungles, who never seemed to face consequences for their failures because they were always positioned to blame someone else. It's as simple as you make it, Hardwick replied. Kane is a terrorist, a traitor, a man who's been selling American intelligence for 30 years. Turning him over to proper authorities is your duty. And those authorities are me. The proper authorities, Jack said quietly, don't usually try to murder their own Marines with Hellfire missiles. Hardwick's expression didn't change. I have no idea what you're talking about. The compound was hit by insurgent reinforcements. Tragic, but these things happen in war. If you're suggesting something else, well, that sounds like the kind of conspiracy theory people tell when they're suffering from combat stress and poor judgment. Jack felt something cold and hard settle into his chest. The absolute certainty that Hardwick was prepared to kill everyone who knew the truth and sleep perfectly well afterward. Men like this didn't have consciences. They had cost-benefit analyses. And right now, the cost of letting Jack and Chen live was higher than the benefit of their silence. I want to see Ryan first, Jack said. Proof of life. Then we talk about Kane. Hardwick pulled out a tablet, brought up a video feed. The image showed Ryan in what looked like a storage room, sitting in a chair with his hands zip-tied behind him. The bandages still wrapped around his head from Karak Valley. Two armed men in civilian clothes stood behind him, their faces obscured, but their body language professional. Contractors, probably. The kind who asked no questions and left no witnesses. Ryan looked tired but alert, his eyes tracking something off camera. As Jack watched, one of the guards leaned down and said something that made Ryan's jaw tighten with barely controlled rage. He's fine, Hardwick said, for now. But my people have orders. If I don't check in every 30 minutes, if anything happens to me, if this situation goes in any direction I don't like, those orders change. And your boy learns what happens when fathers make poor choices. Jack's hand moved incrementally closer to his rifle. Muscle memory calculating angles and distances and the probability of getting a shot off before Hardwick's people could execute Ryan. The math came back the same way it always did in hostage situations. Impossible odds dressed up as tactics. So here's how this works, Hardwick continued. You bring Kane to me, right now. No delays, no tricks. Then you and Chen and every Marine who's still breathing forget everything that happened tonight. You go back to counting bullets, Chen goes back to running patrols, and we all pretend the conspiracy theories never existed. And in exchange, Ryan lives, Jack said. In exchange, everyone lives. You get your son back, your Marines get to go home to their families. All it costs is one traitor who frankly deserves whatever he gets. Hardwick spread his hands like he was offering a gift. That's a trade any father would make, any good Marine would make. So make it, Sergeant, before I lose patience and the costs start going up. Jack turned slightly, caught Chen's eye. She was standing 30 yards back with her radio operator, her expression unreadable in the darkness, but her posture tense as bridge cable. They had talked on the helicopter ride back, had made plans that depended on Hardwick being predictable and arrogant and convinced of his own invincibility. Now came the moment where they learned if those plans were worth the lives they were gambling. All right, Jack said, letting his shoulders slump in defeat that was only partially faked. You win. Kane for Ryan. Straight trade. Smart man, Hardwick said. I knew you'd see reason eventually. The rifle, though, that stays here. Can't have you getting any ideas during the exchange. Jack unslung the M40A1 slowly, the weapon that had been his companion through 3 decades of exile and shame. He set it on the tarmac with a gentleness usually reserved for fragile things, then straightened and walked back toward the helicopter. Kane was still sitting in the cargo bay, hands cuffed, blood seeping through the bandages wrapped around his torso. He looked up as Jack approached, his expression somewhere between amusement and resignation. So you're really doing this, Kane said, trading me for Ryan, letting Hardwick win again. Hardwick hasn't won in anything, Jack replied quietly. He's just about to learn what happens when you underestimate desperate old men. He pulled Kane to his feet, started walking him across the tarmac toward where Hardwick waited. Each step felt like walking toward an edge he couldn't see, the kind of drop that killed you, whether you jumped or got pushed. But there was no other choice. No path that didn't risk Ryan. No option that saved everyone. Sometimes you could only save what mattered most and hope it was enough. They were 10 yards from Hardwick when Kane stumbled, his wounded leg giving out in what looked like genuine weakness, but might have been something else. Jack caught him, keeping him upright, and felt something small and hard pressed into his palm. A key, handcuff key, small enough to hide in a closed fist. The truth needs to survive, Kane whispered, too quiet for anyone else to hear. Even if we don't. Jack pocketed the key without acknowledgement and kept walking. Hardwick had his tablet out again, showing Ryan still alive, still waiting. Your boy's 5 minutes away. Small warehouse on the south side of base. Soon as I have Kane secured, my people release him. You go collect your son. Everyone goes home. We never speak of this again. Except it won't work like that, Jack said, stopping just outside arm's reach. You need me and Chen and every witness dead. Kane's just the first domino. Once he's secure, you'll manufacture some reason to eliminate the rest of us. Training accident, insurgent attack, whatever story keeps you clean. You're paranoid, Sergeant. I'm experienced. There's a difference. Jack met Hardwick's eyes. So here's what's actually going to happen. You're going to let Ryan go right now. Not in 5 minutes. Not after you have Kane. Right now, you're going to call your people and tell them to cut him loose. Hardwick's smile finally slipped. Or what? You shoot me and my people kill your son anyway? You don't have leverage here, Dalton. You have desperation and delusion. No, Jack said, I have Lieutenant Chen. On cue, Chen stepped forward into the light, her tablet raised and recording. Colonel Hardwick, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, treason, and the deaths of 6 Marines in 1991. Everything you've said in the last 10 minutes has been transmitted to the Inspector General's office, the JAG Corps, and 3 different news organizations. You're done. Hardwick's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, anger, and finally calculation. You're bluffing. There's no transmission. We're in a communications blackout zone I personally authorized. You authorized a blackout on standard military frequencies, Chen agreed. But I've got friends in signals intelligence who owe me favors. Friends who set up a direct satellite uplink on this bird before we even left for the raid. Everything you've said, everything you've done, it's all been recorded and transmitted in real time. She smiled without humor. You're not the only one who can plan ahead, sir. For 3 seconds, that felt like hours. Nobody moved. Then Hardwick's hand moved toward the radio on his belt, and Jack knew with absolute certainty what was about to happen. The colonel was going to give the order to execute Ryan anyway, because if he was going down, he was taking everyone with him, because men like Hardwick didn't surrender even when the game was lost. Jack's hand was already moving, muscle memory from 1,000 training repetitions guiding him to the pistol on his belt. His M9 cleared leather as Hardwick's fingers touched the radio. The shot rang out across the tarmac, loud enough to wake anyone who was still sleeping, final enough to end 30 years of running. The bullet took Hardwick in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. Not a kill shot, not even close, but enough to stop him from giving an order that would have murdered Jack's son. Marines swarmed forward from the perimeter, weapons trained on Hardwick as medics rushed to treat the wound. The colonel was screaming something about unlawful orders and mutiny and military justice, but his voice was getting weaker as shock set in and the reality of his situation became undeniable. Jack was already running toward the south side of base, his legs pumping with a speed that 58 years had no business producing, his lungs burning with effort and fear and the desperate prayer that Ryan was still alive, that Hardwick's people hadn't received whatever coded signal meant execute the hostage. The warehouse loomed out of the darkness, a standard prefab metal building that could have contained anything from vehicle parts to human beings waiting to die. Jack hit the door at full sprint, shouldering through it with his M9 up and ready. Inside, the 2 contractors stood over Ryan with weapons drawn, radios crackling with confused traffic asking for confirmation of orders. They turned at Jack's entrance, their training evident in how smoothly they brought their rifles around. Put them down, Jack said, his voice carrying across the warehouse. Your boss is in custody. You shoot that Marine, you're not contractors anymore. You're murderers. And I promise you, I will dedicate whatever time I have left on this earth to making sure you both hang for it. The contractors looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. Then slowly they lowered their weapons. These were professionals, not fanatics. They killed for money, not ideology. And dead employers didn't pay bills. Jack crossed to Ryan, pulled out the handcuff key Kane had slipped him, and cut his son free. Ryan stood up with his hands still shaking from zip-tie compression, his face pale but eyes clear. Dad, Ryan said, and his voice cracked on the word. I thought he was going to kill you. Thought I was going to die, never telling you I was sorry for how I treated you. Jack pulled his son into a hug that was probably too tight, too desperate, too revealing of the fear that had driven him across the tarmac. You don't have anything to be sorry for. I'm the one who wasted years we could have spent being honest with each other. So let's stop wasting time, Ryan said into his father's shoulder. Let's go home. Let's be a family again. Whatever that looks like after all this. They walked out of the warehouse together, father and son, into a dawn that was just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of gold and amber. The base was controlled chaos, MPPS arresting Hardwick's TO conspirators, investigators securing evidence, Chen coordinating with what seemed like every agency that had initials in jurisdiction. Kane was still sitting on the tarmac where Jack had left him, watching everything unfold with the detached interest of a man who had stopped having stakes in outcomes. Jack approached him slowly, aware that despite the handcuffs and the wound, Kane was still dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with physical capability. You gave me the key, Jack said. You could have used it yourself, could have escaped in the chaos. Kane shrugged, winced at the pain it caused. Where would I go? I'm 61 years old with a bullet hole in me and more enemies than friends on 3 continents. Face it, Jack. We're both too old for this shit. Difference is, you've got a son who cares whether you live or die. I've got nothing except the knowledge that I destroyed the only friendship that ever mattered for money I barely remember spending. The 6 Marines from 91, Jack said. Did you know the ambush was going to kill him specifically? Or was it just bad luck? Kane was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on something distant that might have been memory or might have been regret. I knew Williams was selling to both sides. I knew the Iraqis were planning something. But I told myself it wouldn't be our team, wouldn't be our patrol, that someone else would pay the price for my choices. He met Jack's eyes. I was wrong, and I've spent 30 years knowing that 6 good men died because I was too greedy and too cowardly to do the right thing. That doesn't make it okay, Jack said. No, it doesn't, but it's all I've got. Kane nodded toward Ryan, standing with Chen across the tarmac. You saved your son. That's what matters. That's what I should have done 30 years ago. Chosen honor over profit, brotherhood over advancement. But I didn't. And now we both get to live with the consequences. I'm going to testify, Jack said. Going to tell them everything. About Williams, about Hardwick, about the 30 years you spent selling American intelligence to anyone with money. You're going to prison, Vince. Probably for life. Good, Kane said simply. I deserve it. Maybe more than that. But Jack, listen. When you testify, when you tell them about 91, make sure they know about the other 6, the ones who died because of me. I will. And tell Ryan, Kane's voice dropped even lower. Tell him that having a father who chooses him over everything else, that's a gift. That's something I never had and never gave. Don't waste it by dying for honor when you can live for love. Jack wanted to say something else, wanted to find words that would encompass 30 years of betrayal and hatred and the strange, twisted path that had led them both to this moment. But Ryan was walking toward him, and Chen was gesturing that they needed to move, and the sun was coming up on a day that would change everything. So he just nodded once to Kane, a gesture that meant both acknowledgement and goodbye, and turned to face whatever came next. The next 72 hours were a storm of interviews and investigations and official reports that turned the simple truth into hundreds of pages of bureaucratic documentation. Jack told his story to the Inspector General, to JAG investigators, to 3 different congressional committees via video link. Chen corroborated everything, her recordings providing evidence that was impossible to deny or spin. Hardwick was court-martialed within a week, his network of co-conspirators unraveling as everyone tried to cut deals and minimize their own exposure. The investigation eventually reached all the way to the Pentagon, forcing early retirements and quiet resignations from officers who had benefited from the illegal intelligence operation. Kane cooperated fully, providing names and dates and operational details that broke open cases investigators had been chasing for years. He pled guilty to everything, refused to fight the charges, and accepted a life sentence at Leavenworth without apparent regret. The 6 Marines from the 1991 were posthumously cleared of any operational failures. Their service records corrected to reflect what actually happened. Their families received benefits they should have gotten 30 years ago, along with apologies that didn't bring anyone back but acknowledged the truth. And Jack Dalton, supply sergeant and failed sniper and father who had almost lost everything, was quietly offered a restoration of rank, back pay, and a formal apology from a Marine Corps that had allowed an innocent man to suffer for 3 decades. He declined all of it. "I don't need the Corps to tell me I was right," he explained to the Major General, who came to personally deliver the offer. "I know I was right, and the 6 know. That's enough." What Jack did accept was an honorable discharge, a full pension, and permission to return to the United States with his son. They flew out of Afghanistan on a gray morning in November, leaving behind the mountains and the heat and the ghosts that had haunted them both. 6 months later, Jack stood in Arlington National Cemetery in front of Sarah's grave, with Ryan beside him and the weak Virginia sun trying to break through clouds that promised rain. He had finally done what she asked, told the truth, faced his demons, saved what mattered most. "She would have been proud," Ryan said quietly, his hand on his father's shoulder, "of what you did, of who you became." "I became who I always was," Jack replied. "Just took me 30 years to remember." He placed Sarah's dog tags on the grave, along with the brass round he had carried since 1991. "For Kane," the engraving said. But Kane was in prison, and the 6 Marines were dead, and the only person who needed that round anymore was Jack himself. Letting it go felt like releasing weight he had been carrying so long, he had forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. "What now?" Ryan asked. "What do we do with the rest of our lives?" Jack thought about that, about the years ahead, about the possibility of peace after decades of war, both foreign and domestic, about being a father instead of a ghost, about living instead of surviving. "We go home," he said, "wherever that is. We build something, we heal, and we remember the ones who didn't make it out." They walked back through the cemetery together, past rows of white headstones that marked the price of service and sacrifice. Somewhere among them were the 6 Marines from 1991, finally at rest. Somewhere behind them was Sarah, released from the burden of secrets. Somewhere ahead was a life that Jack had earned through 30 years of suffering and 1 moment of courage. 3 months after Arlington, Jack opened a small business in Montana, a shooting range and training facility for veterans who needed to remember how to feel in control of something. He taught marksmanship to people who had forgotten how to trust themselves, taught breathing techniques to people whose nightmares wouldn't let them sleep, taught that sometimes the hardest target to hit was peace, but it was worth taking the shot. Ryan worked with him, the relationship they had lost slowly rebuilding through shared purpose and honest conversation. They didn't talk about Afghanistan much, didn't need to. The important things had been said, the rest was just living. On a cold December morning, 1 year after the confrontation with Hardwick, Jack received a letter from Leavenworth. Kane had died, heart attack in his sleep. No pain, no drama, just the quiet ending that men like him rarely got. The letter included a note Kane had written weeks before his death, to be delivered only when he was gone. Jack read it, standing in the snow outside his range, his breath fogging in the mountain air. "Jack," the note said in Kane's familiar handwriting, "I don't expect forgiveness, don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that watching you choose your son over revenge, watching you be the man I should have been 30 years ago, that gave me something I haven't felt in a long time. Hope. Not for me. I'm past redemption. But hope that maybe the world produces more men like you than men like me. Hope that honor still means something. Hope that fathers who love their sons more than they hate their enemies might actually inherit something worth having. Take care of Ryan. Build something good. And remember that the 6 didn't die for nothing. They died because one man failed them, but they're remembered because another man refused to let their sacrifice be forgotten. That man was you. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything I couldn't be. Semper Fi, brother. One last time. Vince." Jack folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket next to where the brass round used to rest. Then he went back inside where Ryan was teaching a class of veterans how to control their breathing, how to calm their minds, how to take one good shot when it mattered most. The mountains rose around them, ancient and indifferent. The snow fell in silence, and Jack Dalton, 59 years old and finally free, taught young men and women how to survive the wars they brought home with them. Because that was what you did when you had been cargo for 30 years and finally remembered you were a Marine. You carried what mattered, you protected what you loved, and you took the shot that saved lives instead of ending them. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, a rifle cracked. Someone taking their first confident shot in years. Someone finding peace one trigger pull at a time. Jack smiled and went to see if they needed help with their breathing. The war was over. The war was finally over. And he had come home. The end. I've told hundreds of war stories, but Jack Dalton's hit different. 30 years carrying shame that wasn't his. While his son thought he was a coward, that 847-yard shot wasn't just skill, it was a father finally showing who he really was. Question for veterans and fathers. Ever had to choose between protecting your reputation and protecting someone you love? What did you choose? Drop your thoughts below. If this resonated, we've got more untold warrior stories every week. Hit subscribe. These stories deserve to be remembered. Semper Fi. Your stories matter.